I was free. After saying goodbye to my parents at Yosemite, I headed out to Interstate 5 and drove north. I crossed the Canadian border near Seattle and made my way into British Columbia on my way to Alaska. Dad and I had talked about starting a small flying business back in Texas. While I could have found a place for it in Texas, there were already many other airlines serving rural areas and bringing passengers to big cities. It would have been difficult. I wasn't interested in being a commercial airline pilot. I unfairly thought of airline pilots as just bus drivers in the sky. I wanted to fly small planes to places that hardly anyone visited, but I also wanted to make money. Alaska felt like the best place for that. In Alaska, I found a job quickly because everything was expensive there. I ended up flying small planes for a small company in Anchorage. Frederick Simpson owned a fleet of 6 otters he used to fly small groups of passengers to remote villages and deliver various goods. Working for Mr. Simpson was perfect for me. I gained experience in flying and running a small business. I'm not sure if time heals everything, but it does help cover up the hurts. The last couple of years had been quite something. I had caught my wife with her boss and his wife, and while I had let go of most of the anger, the end of our marriage still affected me. I also had many thoughts about what could have been with Mercedes and, to a lesser extent, Stephanie. Yet time was helping me deal with those feelings. Some memories still stung, but I was learning to accept things as they were. Almost a year after I arrived in Alaska, another birthday came around, and I had settled into a routine of flying almost every day. I had turned 31. In my father's words, I was old enough to know better but still young enough to take chances. I wasn't sure what those chances were, but it felt fitting. I flew an old but sturdy de Havilland single-engine otter to a new spot on the northern slope of Alaska, taking 9 tourists to a small village called Barron. Someone had decided it was the perfect place for people to see huge caribou herds, a coastline filled with ice year-round, and oil drilling nearby. I had no idea why people would pay to see that, but they did. Maybe it was just the excitement of the experience. This village had a restaurant that served sandwiches and soup for lunch. The furniture was new and functional, but the food was a bit questionable. In this company town, I often found myself visiting the local cafe and restaurant. As I sat down to eat what was called a chicken salad sandwich, I had my doubts about whether it was actually chicken. I hoped the onion soup next to my plate would taste better than the sandwich. "May I sit with you?" a voice interrupted. I looked up and was happy to see a young woman I had met a few days ago. "Of course, Miss Kincaid, please be my guest," I said, standing up until she was seated. Having company always made lunch more enjoyable. Sharon Kincaid looked to be in her late 20s, maybe around 27 or 28. She was fairly average in appearance, not unattractive, but not striking either. With a little makeup, she might have looked quite nice. She was about 5 inches tall, and while her clothes seemed a bit baggy, I had a feeling she had a nice figure hidden underneath. Some of her clothing choices were likely due to the chilly winds outside, even in summer. However, it seemed she preferred loose-fitting attire. I wished she would choose outfits that showed off her long legs a bit more. I have always liked women with long legs. "Sharon," she said as she settled into a chair across from me. "Sharon it is," I replied. I leaned in and glanced around the room. "Okay, no one's listening," I whispered playfully. "You can call me Matt," I added with a grin to show I was joking. "Smart Alec," Sharon said, looking at her sandwich as if it held secrets about its ingredients. "Wow," I responded. "We had just a few hours together on the flight, and now in just a few minutes. It seems like you know me well." She shook her head and rolled her eyes at my silly banter, but a small smile appeared on her face, lighting up her features and easing the stress I noticed earlier. I liked that. We talked, starting with our meals and then moving on to different topics. Her eyes were warm as she relaxed. They were hazel, a color I had never seen before. She also had lovely hands, well-shaped and delicate. After lunch, since we both had no plans and nowhere to be, we decided to take a long walk around the site. We ended up back at the dining facility just in time for dinner. Overall, it was a pleasant day for both of us. I didn't sense that she wanted to leave, which made me feel good. It seemed like we had connected quite well. I had gone on a few dates after Mercedes and Stephanie returned to their dance group in Philadelphia, but nothing really clicked. The next morning, I met Miss Sharon Kincaid for breakfast. We spent the day talking and exploring a small part of Alaska. It was nice. I enjoyed learning about her. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, and her cheerful smile was lovely. That evening there was a dance organized by the resort in the restaurant. They cleared most of the tables and chairs, leaving just a few small ones around the edges. The middle of the room was now a dance floor with music from a DJ and a basic sound system. I arrived a bit late. I was flying the de Havilland the next morning and had spent a lot of time checking everything, making sure I had my navigation maps ready. There were many details to go over, and good pilots make sure to do all that before flying. When I got to the dance, I was surprised to see Sharon sitting alone at one of the side tables. I wondered why she wasn't dancing. There were many single men looking for partners, and Sharon was someone they would likely want to dance with. "Hi, Sharon, can I sit here?" I asked. I could tell she was happy to see me when her face lit up and she smiled warmly. She straightened up and motioned for me to sit down. Her smile was wonderful. She should do that more often. It made her eyes shine. She looked fantastic. She wore a blouse and slacks since skirts were not common in this area. Her long legs were covered, but she wore shoes instead of boots this time. I saw a glimpse of her ankle, which was nice. I ordered a Diet Coke instead of a beer. I wanted to be clear-headed for my flight. Sharon and I danced for most of the evening, taking brief breaks to chat while we sat at the table. Mercedes and Stephanie were professional dancers, and they had taught me a few basic dance steps during our time together. By then, I had become pretty good at keeping up with a lively partner. Sharon and I danced well together. I felt good being on the floor with her. Being with her was wonderful, and when the DJ announced the night was over, I was surprised at how quickly time had passed. I felt a mix of sadness and surprise on my face, and I knew she noticed. It pleased her to see that I didn't want the evening to end. We held hands as we walked back to her little cabin. After she unlocked the door, she turned to me and I wrapped my arms around her as if we had done it many times before. She tilted her face up and we shared our first kiss. It wasn't just a quick kiss, but it wasn't too intense either. It was nice. Her lips were soft, and I found myself wanting to kiss her again. Sharon, a bit shy at first, then more eagerly, put her arms around my neck and kissed me back. When we finally stopped kissing, she looked at me with a hint of worry in her eyes. "You know they call me the Ice Bitch Princess, right?" she said, clearly not fond of that nickname. I didn't know about that nickname and couldn't understand why someone would call her that. Holding her close, I looked into her eyes for answers. I noticed warmth there, but also maybe some sadness and loneliness. I understood. I felt a bit like that, too. I said softly, "Well, anyone who calls you that never really knew you, did they?" I kissed her again, and this one lasted longer, as did the next. I finally pulled away because I didn't want to push her into anything she wasn't comfortable with. "I have to go now," I said gently. "I need to get some rest. We're flying tomorrow." She nodded, understanding, and gave me another quick kiss, gently releasing her hold on me. I smiled and walked away. I didn't hear her door close, which made me wonder if she was watching me leave. I didn't turn around, though. As I walked to the small room I had in the hangar, I thought that I might have found a way to spend more time with Sharon if I hadn't left. But I was also sure I didn't want to rush things. I liked her too much to risk ruining what we had started. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I realized I had called her Honey, and she hadn't minded. The next day, we took off at 9:18 for Fairbanks, a flight of about 400 miles. The plane I was flying could travel a bit over 500 miles when fully loaded, so we were all set. There were 10 people on board, including me. The plane was a float plane, which meant it had wheels below the floats. This way, we could land on a runway or on water. I had not been trained on float planes for very long. Mr. Simpson had wanted to hire an experienced pilot for this kind of aircraft, but he ended up choosing me. To my surprise, he wasn't too upset with my skills. I actually enjoyed landing on water, though it was just as tricky as landing on land if things didn't go well. Sharon Kincaid was sitting in the co-pilot seat for our flight home. I invited her to join me, hoping she wasn't annoyed with me for leaving suddenly the night before or for kissing her. Thankfully, she seemed happy. She smiled brightly and climbed into her seat with ease. Her curiosity about the cockpit was clear, and she looked delightful. I wondered how I hadn't noticed how great she looked before. I could easily get lost in her sparkling hazel eyes. After I finished the usual announcements to the passengers, Sharon and I chatted on the intercom for a while. The rest of the group didn't have headsets, so they couldn't listen in. Our conversations felt natural and easy, helping us get to know each other better. It felt nice. I had missed this kind of connection since Mercedes and Stephanie left my life. We were flying using VFR, meaning I could see the horizon and tell what position we were in. A thick cloud cover floated high above us, hiding the sun, and the wilderness below looked just like all the other untouched areas in Alaska. Around noon, I started to feel uneasy. Fairbanks is not far from where we were, and we had flown in that direction long enough that we should have been nearing the city. But we saw no signs of it. My unease grew. We should have been hearing radio communication and perhaps even spotting other aircraft coming into and leaving Fairbanks, but nothing came through. The visibility was not great, but still it felt strange. Fairbanks November Yankee 105, I called out to the Fairbanks air traffic controller, hoping to get in touch with someone. There was silence. I tried a couple more times, but no one replied. I leaned in closer to the controls and checked the instruments. Sharon noticed my concern and placed her hand on my forearm, but stayed quiet. I squeezed her hand gently, and she didn't pull away. She didn't interrupt my focus with questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. That was another reason I liked her. Suddenly, one of the instruments flickered. Something had happened. It happened so fast that I only caught a quick glimpse. I leaned closer to the panel and, just for fun, tapped the cover of the attitude indicator. To my surprise, the little airplane on the display spun around wildly for a few seconds before settling down. I felt a lump in my throat. My inner ear and a quick look outside told me we hadn't actually flipped upside down and then back again, but that was what the instrument showed. Next, I tapped the GPS compass, and it spun around too. Great! Some of my instruments were acting up, and I had no idea which ones I could trust, if any. The engine was running steadily, which was good, and the controls still responded to my inputs. But this old plane had no electronic systems, just mechanical ones. I checked the circuit breakers, but they seemed fine. I thought about switching them off and back on. But from experience, I knew that sometimes when you turn something off that is only working a bit, it might not work at all when you turn it back on. I leaned back in my seat, unsure of what was happening, but something clearly wasn't right. "Sharon," I said over the intercom, holding her hand, "we're in trouble. Can you get everyone's attention back there?" To her credit, she did exactly as I asked without asking any pointless questions. She turned in her seat and waved to the other 8 passengers, yelling to get their attention. When some of them didn't notice, she shouted louder for them to wake up and pay attention. Her voice was strong. I was glad I had my headset on to save my hearing. I eased back on the throttle, feeling that if I pulled back too much more, we might enter a slow, shallow dive, though the altimeter wasn't working well enough to tell. Reducing the throttle also quieted things down, making it easier for me to be heard in the back. "We are in trouble!" I yelled, clearly and slowly so there would be no misunderstanding. That got their attention right away, and the atmosphere became tense. "My instruments have failed. I can't tell which direction we are going or if we are going up or down. Nothing. That means I don't know where we are." Suddenly, we burst through the clouds and saw the sun again. I turned back to the controls. We were flying straight into the sun. This was not good. At this time of day, we were flying toward the east. Ahead of us was a huge range of tall mountains coming into view. I turned right without thinking and aimed for what I hoped was southwest. The sun isn't usually directly east or west where we were, but seeing it helped me guess our direction. Even a small change in course was better than sticking to the path we were on. "Hey everyone, we just realized we've been going east instead of south," I called to my passengers. "I still don't know exactly where we are, but now I have the plane pointed toward the cities and towns, so we're solving our problems step by step." And we were kind of doing that. Alaska has a low population and it's not very developed. Once, an Air Force plane crashed not far from the airport in Fairbanks, landing in a hard-to-reach valley. As far as anyone knew, no one had ever been in that area. This was close to Alaska's second-largest city. Going southwest from wherever we were was much better than going east into the cold north. However, it didn't mean we would reach a hotel in Fairbanks anytime soon. Even with the engine power low, we wouldn't have enough fuel for long. I needed to land this old plane somewhere before the engine stopped working. I preferred a safe landing over an emergency one. I adjusted the microphone to speak clearly. "Sharon?" I said to get her attention. "Yes?" she replied quickly, looking at me from the right. I could see she was calm. "Can you tell the people in the back what I'm saying for a bit? I need to focus on flying," I asked. "Sure," she said confidently. "Go ahead." "Okay, tell them we'll be out of fuel in about an hour, but it's not urgent right now, we have some time. Then ask everyone to look out the windows for a paved runway. I doubt we'll find one, so if not, look for a lake or somewhere with calm water that I can land on, okay?" She paused for a moment. I realized I'd said that a bit too nicely. I hoped she didn't mind the tone I used. Oops, I might have crossed a line. "Listen up," she shouted from the back of the plane. "Matt says we need to find a place to land. We don't have enough fuel. Look for some pavement or a lake. Let's find a safe spot, okay?" She captured my message well, using words everyone would understand. I reached out and held her hand for a moment. Even with all the chaos around us, touching her felt comforting. The engine roared steadily, not showing signs of giving out. It had taken us some distance southwest, but I didn't know exactly how far. An hour after we realized we were in trouble, my worry grew. I was becoming more anxious about running out of fuel than where we actually were. I was trying to guess how long we'd been flying off course, how much fuel we were using, and many other unknown factors. The fuel gauge showed very little fuel, but I wasn't sure if it was working correctly. It might have been just as faulty as the other instruments. My conclusion was clear. We would have to land soon. The question was whether we would land roughly or with more control. I eased back on the throttle, choosing to fly slower to conserve fuel, and we began a gentle descent. "There! Over there!" someone shouted loudly. I could hear him above the engine noise, but I didn't know who it was. "Where is there? What direction?" I asked sharply. Sharon relayed my questions to the passengers. "To the left," she said. "A bit behind us. Maybe at 7 o'clock, you know what I mean?" "Got it," I responded. "Good way to explain it." She was doing well, staying calm under pressure. I was very grateful for Sharon Kincaid's presence. I turned the plane in a wide left bank, careful not to make any sudden moves, given our low speed. A small lake came into view as we turned, appearing right in front of us. It was 7 or 8 miles away, hidden before by a mountain range. "Thank whoever spotted it. Great job staying alert," I told Sharon, who passed on my thanks. We flew over the lake. I pushed the throttle and made a sharp right turn to avoid getting too close to the mountain we had just passed, then slowed down for a gentle flyby. It looked good, really good. A clear highland lake sparkled below, surrounded by a forest of tall trees. I couldn't tell if they were pines or firs, but it was a beautiful sight with the unspoiled woods framing the lovely oval-shaped lake. The water was so clear I couldn't see anything beneath the surface, which was a great sign, no hidden obstacles to worry about. I made up my mind quickly, as that was how I liked to do things. "Okay, Sharon, let everyone know we're landing on that lake down there. Everyone, tighten your seatbelts and get ready." I caught her nodding out of the corner of my eye. "Okay, everyone," she shouted over the noise of the engine. "The captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please make sure your seatbacks are upright and your seatbelts are secure. We're landing soon, so hold on tight." I couldn't help but smile. Sharon was an amazing person, and I enjoyed being around her, even in a plane that was about to land. I glanced her way, still smiling, and gave her hand a quick friendly pat. She smiled back, holding my hand for a moment before letting go so I could focus. I increased the engine power and turned the plane sharply to align with the lake. I lowered the flaps slightly, keeping the plane high enough to clear the treetops, hovering about 35 feet above the thick forest. As we approached, I lowered the throttle and let the plane descend, adjusting the flaps further for a smoother landing. We glided over the shoreline just 20 feet above and started to settle down. I gently lifted the nose of the plane to ease the front floats as we touched the water. We landed smoothly at first, then with a bit more force as the weight pressed down. Reaching for the controls, I quickly switched to boat mode, transforming our plane into a de Havilland boat. It felt like the best water landing I had ever made. We slowed down quickly. I looked around as best as I could from my seat, but there was nothing to indicate we were in trouble. I asked Sharon to check out her side, and she saw nothing unusual either. Cheers filled the cabin, and behind me there was a lot of celebrating. Sharon turned in her seat, sharing the excitement and high fives with everyone. We were all thrilled to be down safely. We weren't going to crash now, as long as I avoided the tree trunks floating around. I let the engine run quietly, slowing our speed so I could see better. Finally, I spotted a small inlet to my left. It led to what looked like a beach covered in pebbles about halfway up the cove. Moving slowly, we glided into the narrow waterway. A moment later, the front of the floats gently touched the mostly gravel slope we were stopped. I turned off the engine, turned in my seat, and hugged Sharon. I kissed her warmly, and she kissed me back with excitement. So I kissed her again, more slowly this time, and she responded just as sweetly. I reluctantly pulled away from Sharon. I didn't want to stop, but there were things to do. I opened my cockpit door, stepped down onto the left float, and grabbed a short rope with an anchor from a storage bin. I secured the line to one of the landing gear supports and walked to the front of the float, careful to stay away from the hot engine parts. From there, it was an easy jump onto the gravelly shore. The pebbles were wet from the floats, but it was dry a short distance in. I pulled the rope tight, pushed the anchor into the pebbly ground, and stepped on it to sink it a little deeper. The old de Havilland was secure for now. We would make it better later. Looking back, I noticed the passenger door was open, and a man was carefully stepping down onto the left float. "Hey!" I called out. "Come on out and get on dry land. Try not to get your shoes wet, though." In 20 minutes, all 9 passengers were on land with me, trying to stretch or walk away the cramps in their legs. They had brought a few small bags with them, and we would move their larger luggage later. While everyone else was dealing with tight muscles, I climbed back up onto the wing, holding a dry stick. I opened the fuel valve and dipped the stick into the fuel cell. I sighed, closed the cover, and climbed down onto the left pontoon. The fuel barely touched the end of the stick. "Okay." I shouted to get everyone's attention. It might not have been needed, they were already watching me. "Are any of you ex-Navy SEALs?" A few of the men chuckled at that. "Army Rangers? Marine Recon?" I saw a few half-smiles as they watched me. "Does anyone have an uncle named MacGyver?" That joke didn't get a laugh at all. I shrugged. It was a tough crowd. "All right then, let's clear some things up." I looked at everyone, trying to make eye contact with each person. The not-so-good news is that my tools stopped working, and I don't know when that happened. This means I can't tell where we are or where the nearest town is. The batteries in the plane are fully charged, but the radio is broken and I can't fix it. Does anyone here know anything about electronics? No one raised their hand. Okay, does anyone have a satellite phone? Nope. Nothing was going to be easy. All right, that's the bad news. The good news is that we're all still alive, and not one of us has a scratch on us. Second, all bush planes have a survival kit in their tail section, and I've made sure we have all the usual supplies, plus some extras that should help us a lot, I told them. We've got flares, a bit of freeze-dried food, and survival gear like traps for small animals and nets for fishing. I also carry a gun for protection, and I have a rifle too, so we can rely on nature and take care of ourselves while we wait for rescue teams to find us. Everyone thought about this for a moment. I didn't mention that the chances of a rescue team finding us were very slim. After hours of flying over the same empty Arctic landscape, I knew we were off course. Anyone looking for us would start along our planned route and search a bit on either side. They would need to go slowly. It's nearly impossible to spot a small person or even something the size of our plane from the sky. I was quite sure we were truly lost, completely off the map. I decided to let everyone adjust to the wilderness for a couple of days before letting them know we might have to walk out and find help ourselves. We kept busy. We set up 2 anchor lines, looked for useful items in the plane, and scouted the area, which took most of the afternoon. Before we knew it, evening was upon us. One of the guys explored the nearby forest and found a nice clearing about 50 yards inland where we could set up camp for however long we needed. We left the old otter where it was. It would be fine. At our new campsite, there was a small, slow-moving spring nearby with icy cold water. Downhill from the camp, we dug some holes to use as bathrooms. I sent everyone except Sharon to gather fallen branches and wood for our fire. Sharon and I worked together to clear a section of the forest floor, making it tidy and free of dry pine needles and other plants. Then we gathered rocks from the edge of the lake to create a safe fire pit. I had a steel and flint fire starter in my survival gear, along with a pack of 6 colorful plastic lighters and 2 larger lighters with a camouflage design. I opened the packs and gave out the lighters, reminding everyone to keep them in a secure pocket. Being able to start a fire at any time would be really helpful for us. I used the camouflage lighter I saved for myself to light our first fire. We had 2 small, collapsible aluminum pots for boiling water and enough freeze-dried meals to last us for several days. When the sun went down, it got very dark. There were no street lights or city lights nearby. We felt far away from everything. The fire was comforting, creating a warm circle of light around us. We huddled together to talk and get to know each other better, slowly becoming a team. We were no longer just travelers. We were a group working together to survive. I spoke up. All right, if everyone is okay with it, let's introduce ourselves and share a bit about who we are. I only know you as names on a list, and you only know me as the pilot in a cowboy hat. I smiled and took off my hat. So, I'll go first. I'm Matthew Singletary, but you can call me Matt. I'm from Texas and have been flying since I was a teenager, thanks to my uncle. I came to Alaska to fly the small planes that serve the remote areas. I used to run a business before coming here, but I left that life behind and don't miss it at all. I pointed to someone nearby. Hi, I'm Parker Anderson, he said quietly. I'm a Baptist minister from Omaha, Nebraska. He paused as if he was finished, and I guess he was. And I'm Michelle Anderson, said the short brunette sitting next to him with a friendly smile. I run everything in Parker's ministry except for the sermons. This brought some laughter. It was a light moment, and both Michelle and Parker smiled, clearly enjoying their shared joke. The others introduced themselves next. April and Ryan Delaney were from Waycross, Georgia, where Ryan owned a small business for the logging industry. April worked as a hostess at a nice restaurant. Lyle and Penny Martin came from Albuquerque, New Mexico. They both worked in banking. They met at a bank where Penny worked as a cashier and Lyle was a loan officer. Spencer and Wendy Carlisle owned a successful river rafting business in Colorado. I'm Sharon Kincaid. She introduced herself when it was her turn. I live in Anchorage. I only do some volunteer work here and there, she explained. People call me the Ice Princess, but that's not true. I'm just very selective about who I spend time with. She looked around the group. I think I'm going to like everyone here. No foolishness at all. She smiled, but her eyes didn't show much joy. After a few more words, she went quiet. I looked around the group and then up at the sky. The stars were shining like tiny diamonds in the dark. Okay, let's find out which way is north, I said thoughtfully. There's the Big Dipper, there's the little one, and that star at the end of the handle is the North Star. We should mark. Sharon was pulling a long, straight branch and laid it down near the campfire. I took a shorter stick and made small marks in the earth to show east and west. In the morning, we would know roughly where we needed to go. After talking for a while, I collected some small branches to prepare for my sleeping bag. Sharon returned to the fire-lit area and watched as I set up my gear a few yards away from her tent. I had a sleeping bag made for cold weather in my survival kit, but I didn't have a tent. Everyone else had sleeping bags and lightweight tents from their trip to see the caribou. Not having a tent didn't worry me much. The tall trees around us would help shield us from any rain. What are you doing? Sharon asked with a hint of amusement in her voice. Oh, well, the branches and leaves will keep me off the ground and they'll be softer than bare earth, I replied. I know that, Sharon said a bit impatiently. I have some under my sleeping bag too, she continued. And it's inside a tent, she added. Don't be silly. Get in the tent where you'll be dry and can actually sleep. Oh, I'll be fine, I answered. The trees will block most of the rain. There won't be any rain inside my tent, Sharon replied calmly. Her face was lively, and even in the soft firelight I could see she was a bit pink in the cheeks. Her eyes were wide as she dealt with someone she had previously called a fool. With her hair blowing softly in the gentle breeze, she looked beautiful. Yes, dear, I said with a smile. She laughed lightly, and it didn't sound mean. A small smile appeared on her lips. I picked up my sleeping bag, walked to her tent, and put it inside. I sat down on a tree limb to pull off my boots. and Sharon had already removed hers. She crawled into the small tent, making herself comfortable. As I started to climb in, she tossed my sleeping bag back out. "Hey," I said, not really having anything else to say in the moment. "Don't need it," she replied matter-of-factly. "We'll be warmer this way, and there's no room for an extra sleeping bag in here." Peeking inside, I could see that she was right. There was barely any space. "Right," I muttered. "I heard that," she teased. I crawled into the tent, finding her double-sized sleeping bag covering the entire floor. Sharon was handing me the clothes she'd worn all day. "Could you hang these outside on a branch or something?" she asked. Without saying much, I took her things and draped them over a low limb nearby. I turned back as she called my name one more time. "You should hang up your jeans and that itchy shirt, too," she added with a smile. "Everything works better for warmth this way." I understood enough to know that layers work better up close, and it was getting cooler out here. I slipped off my jeans and shirt, leaving on my socks and boxers, and crawled into the tent as quickly as I could to stay warm. After a moment, I tossed my socks outside too and zipped up the entrance. I adjusted myself on the sleeping bag floor to find her already settled, turned to face me, and offering a comforting, warm smile. "Come on, Matt," she said simply. I slid into place next to her. She pulled the sleeping bag cover over both of us, turning slightly so we could share the warmth. She reached behind me and pulled the sleeping bag up to cover us. I lay on my left side looking at her while she faced me from her right side. We were close to each other, as if we had been doing this for a long time. Her arms rested around my neck. We spent a few minutes sharing soft kisses that felt nice without being too intense. My left arm was under her neck and my right arm was around her shoulders. "You know," she said quietly, "if you had asked me in a better way last night, you could have joined me in my sleeping bag." I wasn't sure what she wanted to hear, so I told her how I felt. "I want our first time to be something we both choose when we know it's right. We probably won't need any special words for that," I replied softly. Sharon propped herself up on her elbow and looked into my eyes in the moonlight. She seemed to find what she needed. After a gentle kiss, she lay back down with a happy sigh. We slept peacefully in each other's arms and woke up in the same position, sharing more kisses. "Hey, Matt, what should I do with this big box?" Spence called out. He preferred to be called Spence instead of Spencer. He was in the back of the Otter trying to save anything useful from the inside of the airplane. At first, I wasn't sure what he meant. Then I saw him lift a large package from the last seat in the cabin. It looked somewhat heavy. I adjusted the weight on my hip. A lot of people in Alaska carry items for protection, but I was still getting used to it. "I have no idea. Bring it here and let's see," I replied. I recalled that the box was given to me to deliver to an old friend at a drilling company in a nearby area. When I tried to reach him, I learned he had already left 3 days before I arrived, so now I needed to bring the box back with me. When Spence opened the package, we found it filled with bars of soap and toothpaste. We divided the items and added them to our backpacks. On our second day, we continued to settle into our new spot in the wilderness. Reverend Anderson, who asked us to call him Parker, was very enthusiastic about fishing. He took charge of the gill nets in my survival gear and caught enough fish for dinner. He caught so many fish that we could have fed a bigger group, so we didn't have to touch our precious freeze-dried meals that night. We all felt comfortably full. That night, Sharon and I shared her sleeping bag and tent again. None of the married couples seemed to notice that 2 single members of the group were getting along well. It was a nice setup for me, and I think Sharon felt the same way. The next day marked our 3rd day of survival in a remote area that could be Alaska or maybe northwestern Canada. It felt similar to the day before, except people were starting to get restless. At lunch, which was more fish cooked on flat rocks over the fire, I decided to address a topic I had been avoiding for 2 days. I explained that we probably wouldn't be rescued because we were too far from any search areas. Next, I suggested that we needed to save ourselves by hiking out of the mountains to find civilization. The group accepted this idea well. They were all smart adults, and the reality of our situation was clear. In fact, everything went so smoothly that I didn't need to convince anyone. We began sorting out our gear and putting items into our backpacks to see what we could carry on a long hike. I had the only large backpack while everyone else had smaller day packs from their trip to see the caribou. I would be carrying more than my fair share of our shared belongings. On the bright side, my backpack was designed to carry heavier loads comfortably, which would make it easier to carry more gear than they could. I was adjusting my backpack, preparing to put it on, when a loud, terrifying scream erupted from the camp behind me. It was a scream filled with pure fear and unmistakable sound. I quickly let my pack drop, unbuckled the strap holding my revolver in its holster, and took it out as fast as I could. There was a bear just outside the camp, not a small black bear, but a large grizzly, around 8 feet tall and very heavy. It was moving into our camp between Sharon's tent and the Delaney's colorful one, casually wandering until the scream startled it. The bear stood up on its hind legs and sniffed the air, seemingly not pleased by the smell. He felt we were intruding in his space, and it was clear he didn't like it. Everyone on that side of the campfire quickly ran to safety. The bear was not fond of the fire and moved away from it, which put him right in my path. I felt uneasy about that. Holding my revolver with both hands, just as I'd been taught, I prepared to defend myself, aiming at the bear's head. Anywhere else, he would just keep coming no matter what. Shooting at his head wasn't much better. It felt like bouncing bullets off a tank, and it only made him angrier. He opened his huge mouth and let out a loud roar, and that gave me a brief moment to act. I had heard that grizzlies could be taken down if you hit them in a vulnerable spot, like the eyes. I aimed for his open mouth, hoping to hit a tooth with my .357 bullet that could reach his brain and stop him. His head was moving, which made it hard to aim. He took all 6 shots from my pistol, and I quickly backed away, opening the cylinder to search for loose bullets in my jacket pocket. Suddenly, Sharon handed me the rifle from my survival gear. She took my pistol at the same time, her hand rummaging in my pocket as I turned with the rifle. The Remington 700 is a bolt-action rifle, so I couldn't shoot as fast as before, but when a .300 Magnum hits something, it causes serious damage even to an 8-foot-tall grizzly. The first shot hit the top of his skull, and the second one chipped a piece off his forehead. Since I couldn't hit his mouth, I aimed the third bullet at his chest, which rocked him back. He wobbled slightly, touched the wound, yet kept coming. I dropped the magazine. I didn't have another one ready. There was a spare in my backpack, but I doubted we had time to grab it. I needed to load some bullets in the magazine I had and hoped he would back off while I did. Sharon handed my revolver back and took the rifle. I moved closer, taking a few steps forward. Mr. Grizz noticed and adjusted to face me. I knelt on the forest floor to aim upward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sharon beside me, ready with the rifle. She must have found the spare magazine and reloaded. I needed to shoot carefully, focusing on my aim and taking my time. I squeezed the trigger as the big bear slowly moved closer. I believed the bullet hitting near his heart would be deadly. It just wouldn't be quick enough. My next shot went in right at the upper gum line and angled upward, hitting just as I needed it to. The grizzly collapsed, his brain incapacitated. The large animal dropped heavily to the ground, landing about 12 feet away from where I was crouched. An hour later, we decided to pack up and leave the campsite behind for good. I mentioned it as an option, but everyone quickly agreed, and we began packing up right away. The bear had been bleeding for a while, and though my earlier shots didn't stop him immediately, they caused enough injury that he left a trail of blood around the area. The scene was a mess, with blood pooling under the bear and splashes of it marking the ground around him. It was clear that scavengers would pick up on the scent soon, and none of us wanted to stay around to find out. We took down our tents and stowed them on top of our backpacks, just as we'd practiced. All our other supplies were packed away or tied to our bags. Without lingering, we started moving southwest, heading toward a peak visible on the horizon. We kept moving until the sun dipped low in the west. After stopping for an hour, we built a small fire to boil water from a nearby creek. Once the water was ready, we poured it into our freeze-dried food packs for a quick meal. After we finished, we put out the fire and continued walking for another hour until the fading light made it hard to see where we were stepping. As darkness set in, we cleaned up as best we could in the creek, the soap from our supplies helping to lift our spirits a little. We found a clear hilltop close to our route and set up camp there, choosing it because it offered a clear view and reduced the chances of animals sneaking up on us. Gathering firewood, we built a larger fire not because we needed the warmth, but because the light helped us feel safer in the vast wilderness around us. That night, when I crawled into the tent, we settled down, both exhausted from the day. Lying quietly, we tried to rest, letting the warmth and security of the tent bring us some peace as we prepared for the days ahead. She locked her legs around me, urging me to go deeper. There was nothing complicated about what we were doing. It wasn't a romantic moment. We were two people sharing a basic connection, reminding each other that we were alive when we could have easily not been. Sharon let out a low sound, pressing her face into a corner of her sleeping bag to quiet herself. When I felt her body respond, I couldn't hold back, and I followed her lead. I slowed down, resting on my heels, but I kept going. Sharon pressed her feet firmly on the tent floor, and I moved with purpose, but gently. Once she caught her breath, she began to seek that feeling again. I picked up the pace a bit, going deeper as she pushed against me eagerly. In a few moments, we were back in the rhythm, both aiming for that high point again. When we were done, Sharon pulled the edge of her sleeping bag over us, and we settled close together, her warm breath on my chest, the scent of her hair surrounding me. As dawn approached, Sharon woke me up, gently shifting on top of me and trying to be quiet. When we both found that moment, she leaned forward, and then we drifted back to sleep. "We'll need to share your sleeping bag tonight while mine dries out," Sharon said with a playful smile the next morning. "But mine is just a bit small, not like your big one," I replied. "So?" She giggled. I understood. We weren't trying to avoid each other while sleeping anyway. Plus, I didn't want to deal with a wet spot. Her sleeping bag definitely needed some fresh air. It wasn't just ours that needed airing out. Apparently, all the other couples in camp had also been having their own moments of connection. We were all a bit tired, but felt good. Everyone smiled at one another. We heated creek water in 2 aluminum buckets, mixing the hot water with cool water to clean up from the previous night's events. This began a routine we would keep, trying to stay clean in our circumstances. The soap we found in the plane helped a lot. Cleaning up took us a couple of hours, but it was worth it. Washing off led to another habit. We stopped worrying about the usual rules of modesty. Living close together made it hard to be modest. We were still shaken from the bear attack and had no plans to forget it anytime soon. We dug holes for our waste, and when someone needed to go, someone else stood guard. We thought this was necessary, so we didn't feel the need to discuss it further. Our modesty took another hit when we realized we would have to change into sleepwear every night. No one wanted to sleep in the sweaty clothes we wore during the day. Getting ready for bed meant we'd wake up the next morning without any clothes on and then put on fresh shirts and pants when it was light out. Our tents were small, barely big enough for 2 people lying down, making it impossible to change clothes inside. So we had to change in public. We each had a few sets of clothes, and we washed the dirty ones in the river, but that could only help so much. The Reverend Parker Anderson, our 27-year-old resident theologian, never complained about the situation. In fact, he and his wife Michelle were doing the same things we all were. I liked Parker. He always stayed positive and was ready to talk to anyone who felt down. I asked him if I could call him Padre. I had read that chaplains on Navy ships during World War II were often called that, no matter their faith. Parker didn't mind at all, and the nickname quickly stuck within our group. It just felt right. The day after the bear attack marked our first full day on the trail, hiking towards safety and civilization. The day before, we hurried away from the bear, wanting to put as much distance between us and it as possible. We succeeded, but we had sore legs and aching backs that first morning. We didn't travel more than 10 miles that day, even though we hiked for 12 hours. It was easier since we walked near a river for most of the journey. That was good. We needed a break as we adjusted to the physical challenge. We were lucky to have a fit group of men and women, but we weren't used to long-distance hiking. It took our bodies a couple of weeks to get used to being active all day, climbing hills, and navigating the rocky riverbanks. After 3 weeks, we had settled into a rhythm and no longer had to struggle with tired muscles each morning. As we continued, each of our unique traits began to show. Penny Martin worked in banking, just like her husband. In high school, she had done track and field, and she kept running as an adult. She found it easy to hike all day and could have easily outpaced all of us if she had tried. Her husband, Lyle, loved fishing too and often worked with the gill nets. Whenever we were by a creek or river, he and the Padre made sure we had fresh fish to eat thanks to their skills. Ryan Delaney was the best cook in our group and took on that job full time. He would cook whatever Lyle and the Padre caught, as well as any game others brought back. As we walked, we picked berries and wild onions from along the trail to add to the meals Ryan prepared. I was the designated hunter. I would take the Remington rifle and step away from the group, trying to hunt a deer or moose. I started with 30 rounds and had already used some, so I was very careful with the rest, aiming to get as close to my target as possible. Sharon became our camp guard, usually carrying my .357 Magnum to accompany people to the latrines we had dug or to keep an eye on those gathering berries. Everyone found ways to help out as we worked toward our shared goal. About a month into our journey, I was out front with the rifle, hoping to find a deer or moose for dinner. We wanted to smoke some meat to take with us, so I was also searching for firewood. I followed one of many game trails that twisted in all directions. As I moved down a ridge, I spotted 2 healthy deer about 100 yards away, seeming to lick at a rock. I was downwind, creeping low and slow so they didn't know I was there. The larger deer raised its head to look around, and I froze, worried that I might have scared it. Crouching behind a small boulder, I had a clear view through my scope and knew just where to aim. The big deer took a few steps toward me, and I stayed calm. I took a deep breath, exhaled, and gently squeezed the trigger. The loud shot echoed through the mountains. The big deer fell, not moving after hitting the ground. The smaller one bolted away. I could have tried to shoot it too, but it would have been risky, and we didn't need more meat at that moment. With only a little bit of supplies left, I didn't want to waste anything, so I decided not to shoot. I walked down the slope to the dead deer and took a closer look. The rock it had been licking was a few yards away, untouched by the mess from its death. Then it hit me. I remembered something from an old TV show. Just like people, wild animals need salt, but there are no easy ways to get it in the wild. Animals have to find the minerals they need naturally. We ended up carefully scraping parts of the salt deposit with our knives and used a hatchet to break off bigger pieces. There was a lot of mineral residue in the soil around us, but we left it there. We gathered enough to give everyone a pound or 2 to carry. We didn't really know how much we would need, but it seemed smart to take extra instead of running out. The salt made the food that our chief cook, Ryan Delaney, made taste a lot better. The salt added to our load, but we accepted the heft because of the taste it added. For a while, we had been trying to lighten our packs. Sharon and I were sleeping under a rain fly that had been over her tent. This way, we didn't have to carry the weight of the tent and rain protection. We had gotten rid of my sleeping bag and were only using her larger one to save more weight. Everyone else was doing the same. We kept all of the supplies for my 2 guns, a couple changes of clothes, and now the salt, but everything else was optional. We were becoming a tight group of hikers moving through the wilderness. "Do you have something to say to me, Matt?" Sharon asked softly one cool night as we sat together in the dim light. "Maybe 3 little words?" she joked. We had been getting closer over time. We had shared moments before, so we were getting to know each other in a different way. We talked almost all the time, sometimes forgetting the others were there, and spent an hour each night softly conversing in our sleeping bag. Well, I thought. Oh, I know. It's going to rain? Oh, wait, that's 4 words. I looked out at the twilight visible beneath the rain cover. Oh, I know. It is raining. Yes, that's 3, I teased back. We were close together, and I was cuddling against her back when her elbow playfully bumped my side. Try again, she said with a smile. Oh, I'm not sure, I replied, wishing I had some protection for my ribs. I rubbed the spot where she had nudged me. Well, there is, no, I couldn't say that. What? She asked impatiently. I was just thinking. I could say I love you, but you already know that. It would not be anything new for you to hear. I don't know how she managed to turn towards me so quickly, but she did. Say it again, she urged softly after a quick peck. I love you, Sharon Kincaid, I said to her. This time the kiss was gentle and longer, filled with warmth. I love you, I repeated. I really enjoyed these kisses. They felt like everything I needed. Why haven't you said that before? She asked. Why didn't you? I replied, sending the question back to her. She leaned close for another sweet kiss. Because the boy has to say it first, she said with a giggle. Are you serious? Here we are in the 21st century and you can't say, I love you first? I asked in disbelief. Nope, she replied firmly. It has to be the boy. Well, I said it now, I pointed out, and you still haven't said it to me. She pressed her lips against mine and climbed closer, wrapping her arms around my neck. I love you, Matthew James Singletary, she said softly and kissed me again. I love you so much. For a while we didn't say much, but we understood each other perfectly. Eventually she lay beside me, snuggling into my chest, our legs tangled together. I have 4 more words to say, I offered gently. They come right after those 3. What are they? She asked sweetly. How about I love you and will you marry me? Sharon was a strong woman, and after our time together she seemed even stronger. As I finished speaking, she leaned over me, arms tight around my neck, pressing her lips to mine with tears in her eyes. After a moment I had to pause and catch my breath. You could just say yes, you know, I suggested. Yes, honey, she whispered. Yes, now and forever. Would you marry me tomorrow if we could? I asked. Yes, she murmured close to my ear. I turned my head just enough not to yell in her ear. Hey, Padre, I called out. Yes, Matt? Can you marry someone without a marriage license? I asked. He hesitated for a moment. I think so, and it would be recognized by God, but you might need to check with the laws in Alaska. How about you marry Sharon and me tomorrow? I'll pay the fee when we get to the next town, okay? Okay, Padre replied. Right after breakfast, I said, confident he could hear my smile. Finally, someone commented. I think it was Spence Carlyle. His wife, Wendy, was a lively woman who often reminded him to be polite. Early the next morning, after a breakfast of leftover deer from the night before, Padre held a small ceremony uniting Sharon and me in marriage. We were on a ridge, overlooking a river valley with snow-covered mountains behind us. It felt like a sacred place. I gave Sharon a wedding ring I'd carved from a piece of pine using my pocket knife. It wasn't fancy, but it was meaningful. She seemed to value the gesture, and I think that's why she had tears in her eyes. Luckily, she didn't scold me for being bold, which was always a plus. We continued on, moving slowly in a southwestern direction. Every night we checked the North Star and planned our path for the next day. Days turned into weeks, then a month. We walked on and on. I lost track of how far we traveled because we often had to go around steep rock faces, avoid tricky mountain slopes, or find safe spots to cross rivers. There was always an obstacle in our way. It was mid-August. Our plane had landed in early May when we arrived at another wide river. It was too deep to walk through, so we needed to build a raft to cross. We had done that twice before, so we knew what to do. We just needed to find the right logs. Logs are heavy, and carrying them is challenging. We needed to look for a spot where the trees were close to the water to make it easier. I turned my back to the river to look at the trees behind us. I was almost convinced we might need to move further up or down the bank to find better logs when Sharon gasped. She hurried around behind me, reaching into a pocket on my backpack. What are you doing? I asked. She didn't answer. She unzipped the pocket, pulled something out, and dashed toward the riverbank. I turned to see what she was up to. There, not 50 yards away on the river, was a small boat, about 20 feet long, painted bright blue and gold, like the Alaska State Troopers' colors. The person steering the boat had likely seen us. We stood in plain view on the bank, but I wanted to make sure. I pulled out my .357 and fired 3 quick shots into the air behind us. I thought the loud sounds would definitely catch the man's attention. Sharon made sure of that. She pulled out the flare gun I'd been carrying since we left the float plane on that distant lake. She aimed at the nearby patrol boat and fired almost straight ahead. The bright red flare shot out, heading straight for the small boat. The pilot saw us and the flare very clearly. The loud noises made him more alert, and the bright flare showed exactly where we were. He waved and turned the boat towards the shore where we were waiting. Then he realized the flare was coming down, right towards his boat. He saw it getting closer. At the last moment, he ducked down to avoid it. The flare went over the boat by several feet, but he couldn't know that when he needed to make a choice. "Hey, stop that!" he shouted when he came back up. "I see you! Give me a minute to get there!" We all laughed on the riverbank. It felt great to laugh about something good happening after so long. I hugged Sharon tightly, kissing her joyfully. The Alaska Wildlife Trooper, that was his job title, made a long call to his boss, using his satellite phone. I noted to myself to get one of those for emergencies away from the city. Trooper Adams shared our names and details with his supervisor while I guided him. He arranged for a large helicopter to bring us back to Fairbanks. It turned out our journey from the wild to the town wasn't too bad. Even if the trooper hadn't found us, we would have come across roads to small towns soon. Those roads would have been just a few days away along the river. That felt good. We were just a normal group of people. But we had done something amazing. We had saved ourselves. Sharon once mentioned her father had some money, but I never asked how much. It didn't really matter to either of us. It seemed her father had quite a lot of money, and his property helped us right away. He owned a large, nice hotel just outside Fairbanks. After the state troopers were satisfied with the initial report about my plane landing and how we managed, we got a ride from a kind secretary in their office who lived near the hotel. As we walked into the lobby, we instantly felt out of place. Our clothing was worn out and a bit ragged, and we smelled pretty strong. Out on the trail, we blended in because everyone else was in the same boat. But in this fancy hotel lobby, we clearly stood out. We paused for a moment, trying to figure out how Sharon would reach someone in her father's business world. It was the second day of September, and we had been missing, presumed dead, for almost 4 months. We weren't quite sure how to say we were back and ready to live again. Sharon solved that problem quickly. She spotted a tall woman in a dark gray business suit and a white blouse walking towards us, followed by a group of other professionals. "Teresa!" Sharon shouted. "Teresa! Over here!" The woman didn't look our way. She heard Sharon because I saw a few people in her group turn to look, but the woman didn't respond. That really upset Sharon. "Teresa Cunningham, you need to pay attention to me," she yelled. That certainly got a reaction. The woman turned, surprised, and quickly found an angry Sharon. Her mouth dropped open, and a shocked look crossed her face. She instinctively handed her phone to a man behind her, expecting him to take it. He caught it, but not without some trouble. Teresa walked towards us, and Sharon rushed to meet her halfway across the lobby for a big hug. I followed along at a slower pace. The two women were emotional, and Sharon was trying her best to explain the long journey we had all taken back to civilization while wiping away tears. It wasn't going smoothly. I touched Sharon's arm, and she turned to me. "Teresa has always been a great friend," she said warmly, before turning back to Teresa. "Terry, I want you to meet my husband, Terry Matt Terry." I reached out my hand. "Nice to meet you, Miss Cunningham," I said, remembering how Sharon addressed her earlier. Teresa seemed a bit confused. She looked from Sharon to me and back several times. "Sharon? Husband? Oh my gosh, when? How? I mean, where did—" Sharon saw her confusion and took pity on her. "Terry, there's a lot to catch up on, but for now, could you help us get a room? We're tired and really need a shower." "Yes, maybe even 2, I added. Sharon smiled up at me. "Maybe more," she said. "Oh yes," Teresa replied. I couldn't tell if she was reacting to our strong smell or to Sharon's suggestion. "Simon," she called out to her group that had been following her across the lobby. "Put Sharon Kincaid, put Mr. Kincaid's daughter and her husband in the penthouse. Now!" Simon seemed to be the hotel manager because he quickly approached the check-in desk, talking fast and making hand gestures to the hostess. Moments later, he returned with a key card for us. He gathered the 3 of us and led us to what appeared to be the VIP elevator. Before the doors opened, he swiped the card on a device next to it. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor, and Simon guided us to a pair of tall double doors that opened into a large suite. Inside, Sharon and I sat on one of the 3 sofas in a sitting area, which was a few steps down. Miss Cunningham was on another sofa, facing us. I felt a bit uneasy because I had been sitting on hard surfaces for months. I promised myself to get used to being comfortable again. "Risa," Sharon started. It seemed she and Miss Teresa Cunningham were friends before all the recent events. "Risa, Matt and I, we tried using our credit cards, but they've all been canceled. I think Matt has a few bills that got wet, but I have no cash at all. Could you ask Uncle Cal if we could get a couple of company cards until we can until we can get our lives back in order?" "Oh," Sharon added, "and I need to call Mom and Dad to tell them I've returned home." Teresa went bright red. "Of course, dear," she replied quickly. "I'm so sorry. I've just been shocked, and I can't think straight." She looked embarrassed for not having suggested those things sooner. "Here, sweetie," she said to Sharon, handing over her phone. It's unlocked. Your parents' numbers are saved. While you talk to them, I'll call Cal and get things started, okay? Sharon took Teresa's phone and scrolled through the contacts to find the number she wanted. This left me and Miss Cunningham looking at each other. We studied one another for a moment. Teresa Cunningham was a striking woman, probably in her early 40s. She had dark eyes and calm features. Her raven black hair was almost shoulder-length, framing her kind face. I guessed she was a high-ranking executive based on her confident presence. I leaned closer to her while Sharon was on the phone with her mother. "Miss Cunningham," I began. "Please, call me Teresa," she said with a warm smile. "Then I'm Matt Matthew James Singletary, to be exact," I replied with a smile of my own. "If I may. Could we, Sharon and I? Is there any way to get a line of credit or something from the shops on the lower level? We'd gladly pay it back as soon as we can. We both really need some clean clothes. We're starting to feel uncomfortable, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us." "I'm sorry, Matt. This is so frustrating. I'm better than this. I'm just in shock." She stood up and walked to a small table by the door. She picked up the house phone. "This is Miss Cunningham," she said when the front desk answered. "Do you know who I am?" "Good. Do I need to ask for Simon Humphrey, or can you help me?" "Great. Could you please find Mr. Charles and Miss Reardon and have them come to the penthouse right away? Also, can you arrange for lunch to be sent up for 3? Something big, please, big portions, all right?" She looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "Big portions? For 2 very hungry people," I joked with a smile. "And lots of drinks. But no plain water. We've had enough of that for a lifetime." She smiled at that and started to relax a bit. She passed on the final details to the person on the other end. "Yes, that will be all for now, thank you," she said, hanging up. She pressed a button and listened for a moment before dialing again. "Donna," she said once she was connected. "Is Cal available?" "Yes, please interrupt the meeting. This is really important. I'll wait." It was only a few seconds. "Cal, if you aren't sitting down, you should sit. You won't believe this Sharon Kincaid is alive," she exclaimed to Cal. "Yes, I'm here in Fairbanks in the penthouse suite with her and her husband right now. Yes, husband." She glanced at me and smiled slightly. "I don't know, Cal. There's so much I still don't understand." She looked at me again. "Maybe temporary credit cards or a cash advance?" I suggested quietly. She nodded in agreement. "Cal, can you arrange for a couple of corporate cards for Sharon and her husband Matt Singletary to use until their personal cards are back?" "Yes, Singletary. Matthew Singletary. Perfect. And can you have them delivered by courier? That would help. Oh, can you also call Mr. Kincaid and share the news? Awesome. No, that should be all for now. Thanks so much, Cal. Goodbye." "Hi, Mom?" Sharon said into Teresa's phone. There was a long pause. "Mom?" She waited a moment more, then pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at the screen. "Mom?" she asked again, then sighed loudly. "Hello?" She looked at me, clearly confused. She answered, Sharon explained, and then there was just silence. "Hello?" "Yes, Jenny. It's Sharon. Yeah. Yes, it's me. We all just walked out of the mountains after the plane crash." "She fainted. Mom fainted," Sharon told us quietly, while she listened to the distant voice. When I was about to say something about her comment, she waved her hand at me and stuck out her tongue with a smile. Since our return to civilization, I had been getting increasingly annoyed when people called what happened a crash, because that was not the right word. Sharon knew it was bothering me. I turned my focus back to Teresa Cunningham, who was observing me too. "So, Miss Cunnin Teresa," I corrected myself. "What do you do for Mr. Kincaid?" "I'm a consultant of sorts. I travel to Mr. Kincaid's various businesses and offer management help," she replied. That rang a bell for me. I nodded to show I understood. "Sounds a lot like something I did in a past job," I said. "My boss called me his paladin, sent out to find the troublemakers and figure out who was stealing money and, well, things like that." I smiled. "Really?" Teresa replied politely. "We should sit down and share stories sometime," she joked. She clearly accepted me and saw me as someone similar. That was nice. I'd been wondering how I would fit in with Sharon's friends. On the flip side, Teresa might still be a bit shaken from seeing Sharon alive again and could still be controlling her feelings. She might be a serious businesswoman after all. "Mom!" Sharon shouted. Yeah, it's me. No, I'm fine, really. We are in Fairbanks, at Daddy's hotel. Yeah, they're taking great care of us. She was a bit annoyed, but then she brightened. Yes, I do have someone I want you to meet. She smiled. When you get here, Mom, you'll like him. They talked a little longer before Sharon hung up. She looked around happily. Mom's going to book a flight here. She's in Florida, and she doesn't know when Dad will be back. What is Dad doing in such a far-off place, Teresa? She asked, confused. Honey, I have no idea, Teresa admitted. You'll just have to ask him when he arrives, she added. The two of them settled in for a long talk, catching up on their friendship before Sharon went on her adventure in the North Slope. I listened for a bit. All right, I finally said. I don't know about you two, but I feel a nice hot shower calling my name, and I can't resist any longer. I smiled as I stood up. Ooh, Sharon sang happily. Me too. Wait for me, babe, she exclaimed. Teresa, she said, turning to her. Cunningham. My husband and I need to clean up a few months of dirt. It might take a while, just so you know. She looked at me briefly before turning back to Teresa. And if we find something nice under all that mud, we might stay a bit longer, okay? She said, hinting at things not said openly. I'll call and have lunch brought in, Teresa said, glancing at her watch. How about exactly 12 noon? That will give you almost 2 hours to clean up. How does that sound? I looked at the clock on the wall and gave Teresa a quick thumbs up. I hurried to catch up with my wife as she headed for the big bathroom. I arrived just in time to help pack clothes we wouldn't wear again into plastic bags we found in the closet. We would find a fire pit for them later. A bit past noon, Sharon and I came out of the bathroom wearing fluffy white robes. On the table near the balcony door, we found 2 large trays filled with food and drinks. A couple of young interns that Miss Cunningham had called for were standing nearby. Sharon and I invited Charles Mallory and Samantha Reardon to join us, and soon, the 5 of us, including Teresa, were enjoying thick sandwiches and big bottles of soda things that Sharon and I had only dreamed of while hiking in the mountains. Charles and Samantha were interns, not paid any better than most interns, and they likely wished for a feast like this one too. Teresa made Charles and Samantha our personal helpers, and they did an excellent job in my opinion. They quickly found my parents' location and phone number because I didn't have it. Mom and Dad was just a contact on my old phone, and all I had to do was press the little green phone icon to reach them on my now disabled phone. Sharon and I, along with everyone else in our survivor group, were considered dead by the authorities. Once the paperwork declared us deceased, it was hard to get back to normal life. I talked to my surprised parents and arranged for them to come to Anchorage. They needed to find a place to store their large RV before heading this way. Teresa had upgraded their tickets to first class without telling me. Teresa took on the role of our guardian, doing small things like the ticket upgrade for my mom and dad. Generally, if Charles and Samantha couldn't get something done, Teresa would handle it. She managed to push through many mid-level managers at Kincaid Business, getting things done efficiently. She had a team of 3 lawyers from Kincaid working on fixing the records of our group's deaths in whatever system needed changes. In just a day and a half, I had a new phone with all my contacts restored from the cloud. I was once again a pilot recognized by the federal government, my Alaska driver's license was updated, and my bank accounts and credit cards were back in use. Everything was in order. They even brought tailors to measure me for a whole new set of clothes. I complained a bit. First, I could pay for what we needed myself. Second, I didn't see the point in having custom-made jeans and shirts. Plus, Sharon and I were both going to gain a little weight now that we weren't constantly hiking every day. No one seemed to pay much attention to me, but they were polite about it. Teresa arranged for everyone in our group to have a full health check. We spent our second day in civilization at a hospital being examined and checked. At the end of the day, we were declared very healthy, which we already knew. That was the last time we were all together. After that, everyone went home to their usual lives. I went home with Sharon. Sharon and I sat in hard plastic seats at the airport, holding hands, talking quietly, and leaning against each other comfortably. I'm sure no one had trouble noticing we were in love, okay? Maybe it was a little obvious. But we didn't care what anyone else thought. We were at Anchorage International Airport, having flown in from Fairbanks, waiting for Sharon's mother. Judith Kincaid had a difficult journey to reach Anchorage. Her husband's corporate jet was lent out to a businessman in Europe, leaving her without a way to fly. Every other flight in that direction was fully booked. In the end, she managed to get a standby ticket in Miami. She went to the waiting area and offered $10,000 and tickets to anywhere in the world to anyone willing to swap their confirmed ticket to Seattle with her. A family of 6 from Galveston took her deal and decided to change their plans to fly to California and Disneyland instead of Seattle. It seemed like a good decision to me. Finally, I saw my future mother-in-law's plane arriving on the tarmac. It was displayed on the monitors showing flight numbers and gates. I couldn't wait. This was going to be a joyful moment. I was trying not to feel sick. Sharon was excited, whispering to me about how much I would love her mom and siblings. I noticed a tall, attractive woman with gray hair coming down the escalator, looking around. Her gaze landed on Sharon and me. I quickly kissed Sharon's cheek to grab her attention and pointed to her mom, who was getting closer. Sharon jumped up from her seat and hurried across the airport lobby. She embraced the woman, who clearly cared for Sharon a lot. I walked slowly, giving them a moment to connect again. Judith Kincaid watched me closely as they hugged. Sharon had told her mom over the phone that she had a husband, so it wasn't a total surprise, but this was our first time meeting in person. I placed my hand gently on Sharon's back, and she stepped out of her mom's hug. She turned slightly so she was between her mom and me, allowing our introductions. Mom, this is my husband, Matt. Matt, this is my mom, Judith, but she likes to be called Judy. Mrs. Kincaid, I said with what I hoped sounded friendly. I figured she had many questions about how her daughter came home with a stranger. Judy, please, she said with a warm smile. I felt relieved that she was welcoming and not upset. I'm keeping him around, Mom, Sharon added with a grin, in case I run into something big and need help. She pointed at the large stuffed polar bear in the lobby. It wasn't a grizzly, but I understood her mix-up. Meeting her mom with a surprise husband was probably stressful for her, too. Judy looked at the bear and then back at her daughter, looking curious. I have a feeling there's a story there, she said. Just then she noticed a driver in uniform approaching. Can we continue this at home? She moved past Sharon and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. That was a good sign. My mother-in-law was friendly, and I really appreciated it. So I hear Matt is the bravest knight ever, who fought the dragon and saved you from a terrible fate? Judy asked Sharon. We were sitting in a spacious family room that I never thought I would see. Sharon and I were snuggled on a sofa while Judy sat with her feet tucked under her on another nearby seat. Judy was captivated by the story we shared. I think I even won her over a bit more when I chose tea instead of coffee. I wanted my drink in a big mug instead of a small cup, but Judy liked it anyway. He is my knight in shining armor, and he really did fight off the monster, Sharon said happily, holding my arm close. We were sitting comfortably, enjoying some soft music and a nice chat. Whoa, hold on, I said. Judy, you need to know that your lovely daughter was right there with me when that bear was coming at us. I was shooting at it with my gun, and Sharon found a rifle and brought it to me, walking straight towards the bear. When I fired all 6 shots, she handed me the rifle and started reloading my pistol. By the time I ran out of shots in the rifle, she had already reloaded the revolver for me. She gave it back and put a new magazine in the rifle. I shot 3 more times at the bear, and your amazing daughter was ready with the rifle when it finally went down. So, if there was a clumsy knight in this story, there was definitely a warrior princess, too. Sharon reached up, touched my face, and gave me a long kiss. Then she turned to her mother with a happy smile. My husband, she said proudly, patting my thigh. We talked for hours about our adventures, telling Judy about how many mountains we climbed, rivers we crossed on rafts, or waded through when they were shallow enough. We shared the special moment when we got married one beautiful morning with the wilderness waking up around us. Judy wiped away tears when Sharon shared that. She came over and hugged her daughter. They both shared an emotional moment. Thank you, son, Judy said after a while. Thank you so much. Then she moved around Sharon and hugged me tightly. Thank you for bringing my daughter home, Matt. Well, we kind of helped each other, I said softly. Judy patted my hand. I see. I know. You two are a great team. You fit well together. The love you have is clear to anyone. I do. I love him, Mom. I love him so much, Sharon said through her tears, making her mother tear up again. Well, come on, I said. feeling misty-eyed myself. You both know if anyone finds out I was crying, my reputation as a brave hero in this town is ruined, right? I tried to add some humor to lighten the mood. Sharon and Judy chuckled a little, and we started to loosen our group hug, so I guess I succeeded. I hope you both know that everyone I know will hear about your romantic trip, and about you defeating that tricky bear, and how you two care for each other. The whole state will know about it before I'm done talking, Judy promised. "Aw, Judy," I started to say. "Mom," she cut in with a bright smile. "Aw, Mom," I replied, then paused. Both women looked at me, waiting for me to continue. I shrugged. I have no idea what I was going to say, I confessed with a sigh. Lost my train of thought. They both laughed at me. I was just a guy, after all. We hugged again and settled down for more tea and stories from our adventure. My mom and dad arrived the next afternoon, and Mr. Kincaid was expected soon. Sharon, Judy, and I went to the airport to meet them and brought them back to the Kincaid home. We settled my parents in one of the guest rooms. Sharon and I stayed in what used to be her bedroom. We spent about an hour getting comfortable and sharing some stories. Judy was excited to tell about the bear encounter, filling the room with laughter as she spoke. I had to step in a few times when Judy exaggerated a bit, but her storytelling was so entertaining that we let her continue. Judy and my mom, Leah, connected right away, and Sharon charmed my dad in no time. Mom glanced at me when she first met Sharon, and I could tell what she was thinking. The last she knew, I was ending things with a woman named Mercedes, and this was clearly not her. I knew I would have to explain that later. When Bruce Kincaid entered the room, I half expected a grand welcome. I could almost hear the imaginary fanfare in the background. Mr. Kincaid sent his assistants off on tasks and removed his coat before looking me in the eye. He shook my hand, then did the same with my parents, giving Sharon a warm hug. It was clear he cared for her. I had been wondering about that. After introductions and some general chatting, Sharon's dad invited more like commanded me to join him in his study, which was just down the hall from the living room. Sharon and I had talked about this and how we were going to handle it. When we came out, I was a bit unsettled by his confidence. He seemed to believe he alone could decide what would make his daughter happy. He was quite sure a pilot like me should not even consider being her husband. I sat back down beside Sharon and smiled at her. She returned my smile with one of her own bright expressions. I nodded. Everything had gone just as she had warned me it would. Kincaid went to a side table and poured himself a good amount of brandy into a glass. Then he settled into a comfortable leather chair next to the fireplace. "So how did it go?" Sharon asked loudly. "They offered me $250,000 to leave Anchorage on the next flight and never return," I replied. Kincaid looked surprised. I wasn't supposed to say that. "Daddy!" Sharon cried out. "You only offered him that much?" She covered her eyes with her hands, seeming to cry in disbelief. "I'm offended. Are you offended?" she asked, turning to me. She stopped pretending to be upset. "I am," I said seriously, nodding. "Daddy!" she complained, turning back to him. "How could you? Only $250,000. Don't you love me, Daddy?" She put on a sad face. "I'm worth much more than that. Daddy, you should offer Matt at least $10 million. $20 million. What were you thinking?" Kincaid looked stunned. He tried to regroup. Sharon would not let him recover. She stood up and walked over to him. Her expression showed she was serious. "Daddy, let's be clear about this. You can accept that I will be with my husband for the rest of our lives. Or you can have the Ice Bitch Princess back, making life difficult for you and your friends," she said firmly, pointing her finger at him. "What's it gonna be, Daddy?" she asked, looking him in the eye. Mr. Kincaid looked around at us. He was smart and realized his daughter had set this whole scene up. He understood she didn't plan to let me go. He knew I had been listening to his offer. Outmaneuvered, he gave in. "Welcome to the family, Matt," he said, lifting his glass toward me. "And good luck," he added, relaxing a bit and even smiling. Sharon returned to sit beside me, and I kissed her gently. "What?" she asked, confused. Sharon and I had an agreement. She was worried about her temper, thinking she lost control too often. To help her, I kissed her every time she held back a comment she wanted to make. She had just vented her feelings at her father, and a kiss wasn't meant to reward that. "You were provoked. A lot," I whispered. And you didn't hurt anyone. I kissed her again a couple of times. We smiled at each other. Besides, Daddy, Sharon said, looking at her father again, you'll want Matt here with me, and our newest grandchild. The room fell silent for a moment. I turned to her, surprised. You mean, you're... She nodded, smiling gently. We got our test results back this morning, remember? I nodded. Mine had a few pages yours didn't, she said. I'm 3 weeks pregnant. Oh my God, I gasped. Then I pulled her close and covered her in kisses. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. I kept it to myself, just in case I needed it, Sharon replied softly. You know, if my dad wasn't being very understanding. I kissed her again. What's that? She asked. Just kisses for you today, I said. You defended me in our marriage, and now you're having our baby. You can't do anything wrong today, love. Then Sharon was pulled away by her mom and mine for hugs and congratulations. I got handshakes and well wishes from my dad and Bruce Kincaid, but no hugs. After the grandmothers were done with Sharon, I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her again. She held onto my neck and kissed me back. Once they finished, Judy sat on the arm of Bruce's chair. Do they remind you of anyone, you and me maybe? She asked Bruce while watching us. Bruce looked at us for a moment, then shrugged. Can't say they do, he replied. Judy elbowed him playfully in the ribs. He winced dramatically. I see where she gets it, I exclaimed. Everyone looked at me, confused. I'm always getting elbowed or pinched, I explained. Now I see she got it from her mom, I said with a grin. It brought a little laugh, easing the tension after a shaky start. Hey, Bruce, just asking for advice, I continued. Do you think a little discipline could help with that elbowing habit? He thought for a moment. I'll let you know, he said, taking the easy way out, and got another playful nudge, but he smiled back. I was starting to like my new father-in-law, and I thought he was warming up to me too. Dad had been looking outside, but as he walked back to his chair, I asked him, Hey, Dad, do you think a little discipline would work with Mom? Would it help with her more, energetic little pats? Dad raised an eyebrow and sat down without answering. He shook his head. Why not? I asked with a chuckle. Mom was looking at a painting as she made her way back to her chair. As she passed, she gently patted me on the arm. That won't work at all, dear, she said softly. I enjoy it too much, she explained, and moved past to sit quietly next to my dad. Dad shrugged and made a playful face, pretending to be overly pleased. Judy burst out laughing. She tried to cover her mouth with both hands, but her giggles escaped anyway. She enjoys it too much, Judy exclaimed, leaning against her husband and playfully trying to muffle her laughter. I felt my eyes widen in surprise. I looked at Sharon. Don't even think about it, she warned with a serious look. She leaned in close to my ear. I'm expecting a baby right now, you know, she whispered gently. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Our marriage in the woods was real, but it wasn't recognized legally in Alaska or anywhere else in the United States. To fix that, we organized a civil ceremony with a marriage license we had paid for a week later. Sharon and I didn't want a big, fancy wedding with lots of guests and stress, but we didn't manage to convey that well. So a month after our civil ceremony, we stood in front of the preacher at the church the Kincaids usually attended and shared the same vows we had exchanged in the woods. Mother Kincaid invited 216 people. Sharon's father gave us a wedding gift of unlimited travel on one of the world's largest airlines, and we took full advantage of it. Our only rules were that the destination needed to be warm, we wouldn't wear heavy clothes, and the hotel had to have plenty of hot water for showers and baths. After months without proper cleaning routines, we were ready to enjoy all that comfort. Thomas Bruce Singletary was born a little less than 8.5 months after we found out we were expecting, and his sister Judith Leah came along 14 months later. From the moment they were born, I felt completely enchanted by them, and they knew it. We agreed to wait before having any more children, wanting to give our first two a chance to grow up a little first. I was certain that Sharon loved me deeply, and we were incredibly happy. That was true until I learned that nothing between a man and a woman is ever completely perfect. Sharon was very ill. She had been getting worse for nearly a year. The cancer was serious. It was taking a toll on her day by day. She had held on for almost 4 months longer than the doctors expected. But as we returned to the hospital this time, We both knew she wouldn't be leaving. Her breathing was short and labored. The pain relief wasn't enough anymore. She was in a lot of pain, but she was fighting hard to stay alive for just one more minute to be with me and our 2 children. The suffering was overwhelming. I stood up from the chair by her hospital bed and leaned over my wife of just a few years. I kissed her lips. I wasn't sure if she could feel it, but maybe she could. For a moment, her breathing got steadier, then it turned into weak gasps. I leaned in to whisper in her ear, "Honey, I will always love you. Our son and daughter know you love them, and they love you too. We will all love you forever. You don't need to fight anymore. It's time to rest. I will take care of Tommy and Judy, and they will take care of me. Please don't worry. We will be all right." I kissed her forehead and her lips again, stroking her thin arms and face as I stayed close. After a moment, she exhaled softly and didn't take another breath. The machines around her started to beep loudly, but I already knew what it meant. My Sharon was gone. With heavy heart, I stood tall and then bent forward to kiss her once more. I gently held her hand, then stepped away from the bed to let the doctor and nurses come in. I turned to face Sharon's parents. I hugged Judy and then Bruce. They stepped up to say goodbye to their youngest daughter. Through my tears, I looked for the door. I needed to find my son and daughter. I had to find a way to tell my 3-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother that their mother would never hold them again, that she was with the angels now, watching over them forever. I wandered for a while, lost in my sadness while trying to be both mother and father to my little ones. I had to help them through their grief while dealing with my own, trying not to let our sadness take over. I found myself feeling bitter towards Anchorage, and even Alaska itself. My in-laws lived there, and we had always gotten along well, but the memories were just too much places Sharon and I had visited, things we had done together. Like animals seeking a safe place to heal, my children and I returned to Texas, where we wouldn't be reminded every day of our loss. Bruce and Judy, my children's grandparents, were not pleased with my choice, but they understood. They were well off and could visit us in Texas whenever they wanted. A trust fund set up by a great-aunt for Sharon matured the year after Tommy was born, and I received the funds after Sharon passed away. I didn't want the money. I tried to give it back, but my in-laws wouldn't accept it, and my great-aunt had passed away. So, I suddenly became a multimillionaire. I decided to use the money wisely and set up 2 trusts, one for each of my children to help them with school or whatever else they wanted to do in life. The extra money stayed in a bank, earning more for my kids and me than we could ever spend. At home, my parents decided they were done traveling around the country looking for the perfect RV campground. Now they planned to wander during spring and autumn. For summer and winter, they thought travel was just too much trouble. They welcomed me and my 2 kids back with open arms. My parents already had a 2-bedroom house on the north side of the city and a little cabin in the hills. They sold that house and moved to a 4-bedroom home, suggesting that my brother Tommy and sister Judy might want to visit more often. Mom and Dad were as happy as I had ever seen them. They got to spend time with their grandchildren and started enjoying spoiling them. They said that was their job as grandparents. I had just turned 36, but I wasn't worried about getting older. I didn't feel like time was slipping away from me. I had my son and daughter, and I was focused on taking care of them. My son Thomas was 5, and my daughter Judith was almost 4. Times had been tough after Sharon passed away. She had been sick for a long time, which felt like mourning even before her death. The kids didn't understand much about it, but they knew their mom wasn't in pain anymore, and that was something good. It didn't replace the loss, but it helped a little. I owned a business, or rather, I was a partner in one. I teamed up with Sharon's friend, Teresa Cunningham. We both had similar roles in the business world, and I asked her to join me after I left my father-in-law's company. Together, we created a consulting firm that looked at every part of other businesses and provided reports to help them improve. Teresa managed most of the daily activities, bringing me in only when major decisions or changes were needed. I had used some of the money from Sharon's trust to help start the business. I controlled 51% of the company, while Teresa and her husband Carl owned the other 49%. Eventually, I planned to make it easy for them to buy my share because I didn't want to work too hard. I just wanted to spend most of my time raising my 2 children, and that's exactly what I did. On a bright sunny day in Texas, my son and daughter convinced me to take them to a place that served pizza that looked like cardboard. In return, they could enjoy lots of small rides and games made for young kids. Even though Judy was not yet 4, she knew how to put a game token in the slot and clapped her hands joyfully while waiting for the game to start. Only after that would she hop on a ride or begin playing the game. Sometimes, I wasn't sure what the games were about, but my kids seemed to just know how to play. That was what mattered. They were having fun. I sat in a booth and watched them a few feet away on a ride. It was a merry-go-round that turned slowly. I thought I would be bored riding it myself, but they looked like they were enjoying themselves. I had helped them get on the ride before sitting down again. I felt responsible for making sure they were safe while we were there. I looked around at the other parents and waited for a special pizza I had ordered, hoping it would taste better than the ones on the buffet. The kids would join me after the ride to eat the pizza or choose something from the buffet. I suspected they would pick from the buffet instead of eating what I had ordered. Watching their happy faces made me smile. Sharon was always in my thoughts, but we were trying to carry on without her. It had been almost a year since she had passed away. "Hey, cowboy," a woman said. "Got room for a couple of girls?" I was wearing a cowboy hat, so the word cowboy felt fitting, but I wondered why someone would. Then I recognized her voice. I turned and saw a beautiful woman with a little girl standing next to her. "My God," I said softly. "Mercedes?" I was up on my feet before I even realized it, looking at a lovely woman with dark hair and bright blue eyes. She smiled nervously at first, then with more confidence. I wasn't sure if I should hug her. I wanted to, but I remembered she had been married. I had read she was getting a divorce, but I didn't know if that was true. "Hi, Matt," she said quietly. She stepped close and gave me a light kiss on the lips, easing my uncertainty. I almost pulled her into a hug to return the kiss warmly. I held her elbows gently and found myself pulling her a bit closer. She seemed happy to come closer for another kiss. I knew I wouldn't cross any lines with a married woman, and I believed she understood my feelings. Still, her behavior felt different from what I expected from someone married. Suddenly, I felt a little tug on my jeans. I stepped back a bit from Mercedes and looked down at the cutest little girl I had ever seen, aside from my own daughter, Judy, of course. I couldn't help but smile at her. She wasn't shy at all. She returned my smile with a big grin. "Are you my mommy's friend?" she asked in a sweet voice. I bent down to talk to her at her level. I always thought it was rude for adults to look down on kids. "I think I must be," I replied. She had to be Mercedes' daughter, maybe even a younger version of her. "Are you my friend?" she asked. "Forever and ever," I said. The little girl beamed and scooted closer, rested her tiny hands on my shoulders, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I could only return the hug and kiss. "What's your name, sweetie?" I asked. "Matea," she answered, "but you can call me Maddie." I was surprised. That was a cute version of my name. I looked up at Mercedes. She smiled and nodded. She had named her daughter after me. I was taken aback. Mercedes silently mouthed, "Later." To me, I definitely wanted to learn more about this. "How old are you, Maddie?" I asked. That was the second question all adults ask children they just met. "3," she quickly answered. She knew how to play along too. She had a bit of trouble showing me 3 fingers, needing to use her other hand to help. I stood up and scanned the area for my kids. Just then, the ride they were on stopped, and they climbed off, looking at me and the 2 new friends I had. I turned to them as they rushed over. "Tommy, Judy, I want you to meet some very good friends of mine. This is Mercedes and her daughter Maddie." The kids paused, unsure of what to do for a moment. To break the silence, I suggested we all go grab some pizza from the buffet and get some drinks. Judy, of course, wanted to check out the ice cream machine right away, but I gave her a knowing look. She understood. She was just testing the waters like all kids do. Before long, all 3 kids were on one side of the booth, happily eating pizza and chatting as if they had known each other forever. They started a game of kicking their feet against the bottom of the table to hear the noise. "I'm pretty sure people who kick tables don't get ice cream," I said loudly. The kicking stopped right away. While I was bringing plates of pizza back to the table for the 3 kids and getting the special pie I ordered, Mercedes ended up sitting close to me on our side of the booth. At first, there was plenty of space. but she quickly moved closer. We were sitting hip to hip, with our elbows touching. I didn't mind. I actually liked it, but I didn't get to ask a few questions, I said. Like, what brings you here and other things. I thought that might start a conversation. I didn't realize I was speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. How to find you? Maddie replied right away, pointing at me. Her voice cut through all the noise around us. I was surprised. I don't think my chin dropped, but it might have. I glanced at Mercedes. Her face was turning red. She wasn't looking at me. Maddie was thrilled at how her words affected the adults at the table. She smiled and repeated herself several times, moving around in her seat and making funny faces. My other kids joined in too. Shh, I said quietly. Eat your pizza, then we'll get some ice cream. Thank goodness for the magic of ice cream. They quieted down and took bites of their pizza. I looked at the still blushing Mercedes beside me, smiling at how cute the kids were. For the record, I said, I've been looking for you too, but my friend couldn't find you. You just vanished. You were looking for me? She asked, surprised. She met my gaze and her blush began to fade. I heard you were getting a divorce, I said carefully. I didn't want to seem like I was stalking her. I tried to contact you but couldn't find a phone number or anything, so I hired someone to help. But he only got so far he lost track of you in Billings, Montana, I think. She smiled. Well, my uncle runs far, great Uncle Walter runs far, picked me up there and took me to his place in Wyoming. Maddie and I stayed with him and his girlfriend for a while because Reggie was being difficult. We needed to get away to a quieter place, she explained. It worked, I said, smiling back. The investigator I hired said it seemed like you disappeared completely. I'm really glad you came, I said. How long can you stay this time? Mercedes looked at me closely as if searching for something in my eyes. She leaned in closer and whispered, Until you tell us to leave. Instead of answering, I gently kissed her lips, taking my time but keeping it light. 3 pairs of curious eyes were watching us closely. What's that song? I asked. Until the 12th of never. A smile spread across my face. I kissed her again, then turned back to the kids who had been quietly watching us. They were busy eating the make-believe pizza. It was clear they really wanted ice cream and were trying their best to be good. Mercedes and I finished our pizza one-handed, her left hand holding my right under the table, and neither of us wanted to let go. Where are you staying? I asked. I was eager to move her and the kids to the ranch soon. I hadn't thought much about it. Mercedes might feel differently, but I hoped to convince her if she wasn't on board. Mercedes laughed and glanced out the window. We just arrived, Maddie and I, plus my investigator. We were heading to the hotel when we spotted your truck. He recognized it, and I told him to pull in here, she explained with another chuckle. He's waiting in his car with our bags in the trunk. I laughed too. Mercedes and I felt like kids again. It seemed rekindling our past romance might be easier than I thought. This felt really nice. Do you want to stay out on the ranch with us? I asked softly. You still have? I nodded. Sort of same place, new house, I clarified. Can Joe? His name is Joe Conway. Put our things in your truck? Mercedes asked, showing no hesitation about staying at my ranch. I took out my remote key and pointed it towards the big glass window. I unlocked the front and back doors, then the tailgate. I only have 2 child seats, I warned. Don't worry, I've got it covered, Mercedes replied with confidence. I brought Maddie's seat all the way from Cheyenne. She freed her right hand and pulled out her phone. Joe, Mercedes, would you please put our things in Matt's truck? She asked. In the back part? She added, glancing at me. Have him put them in the truck bed, I told her, as a plan began to form in my mind. Tell him that we can pay a bit more for the concierge service, okay? I thought that was fair. Private investigators usually didn't deal with carrying bags or setting up car seats. Daddy, my son Tom asked. I raised my eyebrows to show I was listening. Are Maddie and, CDs? He asked, glancing at Mercedes. Are they going to stay with us? He finished. I think so, I replied calmly. Mercedes has been my friend for a long time, and I think Maddie will be my friend too. And they can be your friends as well. What do you think? Tom shrugged. It didn't matter much to him. Okay, he said, accepting it all. Yay! Judy cheered happily. New friends sounded great to her. She paused, her eyes shining with excitement as she turned to Maddie. Do you want to ride horses? Maddie's eyes opened wide. Horses? She shouted, clearly excited by the thought of horse rides. She nodded eagerly. We had just about finished the pizza. There were only a few crusts left and one slice of mushroom resting in the center of a plate, but that was all. Ice cream cones were licked clean, leaving the three little faces covered in sticky cream as they tried out new games. Before he left, Joe had put Maddie's booster seat between Tom and Judy's, which I thought was nice. Tom's seat was still on the driver's side, right behind me, which was where he liked to be. Judy didn't mind, so everything was just right for the three kids. They all fell asleep within just a couple of minutes after we drove away. I had made sure to get comfortable bench seats put in the new pickup, both in the front and the back. I noticed Mercedes looking at the sleeping kids with a warm smile on her face. Since they were asleep, she unbuckled her seatbelt and moved closer to me. If that's not the cutest back seat full of kids in the world, I don't know what is, she said with a joyful tone. I glanced in the rearview mirror and had to agree. 3 lovely children, and 2 of them were mine. Baby, Mercedes said quietly. I'm really sorry about Sharon, she continued. That was so sad. She was such a wonderful woman, I replied. She was a great wife and a fantastic mother, but she was in a lot of pain when she passed. It was tough on Judy and Tom, but we had time to prepare for it, and now we're slowly moving on, I explained. Mercedes gave my arm a gentle pat and kissed my cheek. I have a message for you from Sharon, I said after a moment. Mercedes looked surprised and a little uneasy. A message from a wife who had passed could be more than a little unsettling. I glanced over at her. Well, indirectly anyway, I said, giving in. I looked out the windshield at the road ahead. A couple of months before she passed, Sharon sent everyone away and had me lie next to her on the hospital bed so she could talk to me without tiring. I pointed at a building we were about to drive by. It was Jesse's barbecue where Mercedes and I first met. She recognized it right away. Oh, honey, we have to go there soon, okay? She said excitedly. I noticed she was calling me honey again, just like she did before we separated years ago. I liked it. It felt nice. We will, I promised, giving her a reassuring pat on her thigh. We will. Anyway, Sharon told me that when she was gone, she wanted me to find a woman to love and who would love me and our children. She made me promise, I said to Mercedes. Mercedes looked down, studying her hands in her lap. So, I don't want to scare you away, but my dear wife asked me to find love and let my children be loved too, so if that's not what you want. I paused, taking a moment to find the right words. If you're not on the same page and it's going to be like last time... Stop there, Mercedes interrupted, pointing at a roadside park just ahead. I quickly braked and pulled in safely, making sure not to wake the kids. As we stopped, a cloud of Texas dust floated by the truck. Mercedes turned to me, threw her arms around my neck, and pressed her lips against mine. I want you, I love you, and I'm not going anywhere, she promised. I mean it. I'll be here with you until you tell me to leave. Do you understand, Matthew James? I kissed her back and wrapped my arms around her. You said the L word, I murmured. We didn't do that last time, even though I wanted to. I know, she replied softly. I wanted to too, but if we had, we wouldn't have been able to separate and do what we needed to do. My voice was low and filled with emotion. But this time, little dove that calls at morning, her Cheyenne name, I'm going to say it morning, noon, and night. So if you're not ready for... Just say it, she urged. I love you, I said without hesitation. I love you. I love you too, she replied sweetly, letting out a happy sigh as she rested her cheek on my shoulder. We stayed there for a few more minutes, sharing kisses in comfortable silence. I put the truck back in gear and we continued down the highway. We didn't say much as we drove. We didn't need to. Our relationship, which had been interrupted years before, felt like it had resumed right where it left off. We were incredibly at ease with each other and already making plans for the future. When we arrived home, all 3 kids were lively after their nap on the way back to the ranch. They wanted to do everything at once. When the horses by the corral whinnied, we knew what to do first. Mercedes and I took the 3 children down there, bringing a small bag of apples. The kids fed the other horses while I saddled 2 Shetland ponies I had for my children. I thought about getting another one for Maddie, and I told her that. She was so happy and gave me a big hug and lots of kisses. Judy rode her gentle pony around the paddock by herself. She had only been riding for a month and was very proud of it. I put Maddie in the saddle behind Tommy, and my son took his new friend for a long ride. 3-year-old Maddie held on tight to Tommy's waist while he guided his Shetland around. After a while, 5-year-old Tommy came back to where Mercedes and I were standing and asked us to move Maddie in front of him so she could see where they were going. She loved it. Tommy received a big hug and a kiss on the cheek for that. He wasn't sure how to respond to Maddie's kiss, but accepted it, just like he did with his little sister's kisses. He didn't return them, but he didn't mind. Soon the kids decided they wanted to go swimming. We unsaddled the ponies, gave them water, then brushed them before letting them go back to the pasture. I raced the kids back to the house and sent them upstairs to change into their swimsuits. I thought Mercedes might want to unpack their things while I watched the kids in the wading pool, but she had other plans. She opened one suitcase to get her and Maddie's swimsuits, and we all went to the pool. Mercedes and I watched as the 3 kids laughed and played in the sun and water. As the sun began to set, I started the grill and cooked a couple of steaks for myself and Mercedes, along with some chicken drumsticks for the kids. I also made baked potatoes and roasted some asparagus and other veggies to make sure we all ate healthy. After dinner, the kids used their remaining energy to chase fireflies around the backyard. By bedtime, they were starting to tire. Mercedes and I helped them shower. My kids went into the master bath while Mercedes took little Maddie to the bathroom down the hall. This was all part of my plan. I wanted the kids to be so tired that they would sleep soundly all night long. Mercedes and I walked from my children's bedroom to Maddie's, watching them as they slept. I had my arm around her waist, no longer pretending we were just friends as we had told the kids. I'm pretty sure when the Bible talks about angels, I said, it was thinking of a sleeping child. I smiled. Mercedes replied. She shifted from beside me to in front of me and wrapped her arms around my waist, leaning in close. We shared our first kiss without anyone watching, since she and Stevie left me years ago. We both noticed 3 pairs of curious eyes watching us. In her room, Mercedes opened another suitcase and took out a nightgown before we walked down the hall to my bedroom. It was ours now, and we didn't feel the need to talk about it. We spent the night together, enjoying each other's company and reconnecting. It turned out we still remembered how to be close to one another. Everything felt right. Mercedes got up just before sunrise, put on her nightgown, and went to her bedroom where she still hadn't unpacked her things. We kept up the act of sleeping separately for almost 3 weeks. Mercedes would wake up early to return to her bed, but one morning the alarm clock failed. The first thing we knew of the problem was when all 3 kids climbed into bed with us and said someone needed to get up and make breakfast. They didn't care who cooked pancakes and sausage, but it had to be quick so they could watch their cartoons. Mercedes was in her nightgown, and I was in my boxers. We were lucky we had changed into something before we fell asleep. I didn't want to think about what would have happened if they'd found us unprepared. I decided I would change the batteries in the baby monitors and turn up the volume so we could get some warning next time. Once we got caught, Mercedes officially moved into the master bedroom with me. To our surprise, none of the kids seemed worried that Maddie's mother was now sleeping with Tommy and Judy's father. They didn't mind at all. We had expected a lot of confusion and questions. Feeling encouraged by how well they accepted our closeness, Mercedes and I sat them down to talk about parents. I explained that I wanted to be a father to all 3 of them and that Mercedes would be their mother. I told Tommy and Judy that their mother was in heaven watching over them, but that Mercedes would be there for them every day. They took the news very well. They had already built a close friendship with Mercedes, and she felt the same way about them. Maddie, whose father had been away since before she was born, wondered if I would be her daddy. She asked if I would still read stories to her like we had been doing for weeks. When she learned I would read even more stories and that I would always be around, she was very excited. We thought telling our parents would be difficult. We expected them to give us lots of advice about taking our time and making the right choice. We didn't think they would be against it, but maybe a little hesitant. Since they were nearby, we decided to go to my mom and dad's house first. As soon as my parents hugged the three children, Maddie, Tommy, and Judy ran off to the backyard. Tommy and Judy wanted to show Maddie the sandbox and swing set that Dad had built for them. That left Mercedes and me with my parents, where we accepted a glass of Mom's lemonade and prepared for the conversation we knew was coming. "Mom," I said after taking a big sip of lemonade, "this is Mercedes." I added, "We're going to get married." I told Matt I didn't really need an introduction. Mercedes joined in before my parents could respond. "We actually met years ago in a video chat. Matt introduced us back then." She asked my mom, "Do you remember?" Mom looked surprised. I could tell she was about to ask some important questions but couldn't get them out. She studied Mercedes closely. No, honey, I don't think..." "What if I said I was holding up something special?" Mercedes asked playfully. "Or how about something unique that you left behind from a trip?" Mom blinked, and then she seemed to understand. "Oh dear," Mom exclaimed, blushing bright red. "The girl in the mirror," Dad said with a smile. Dad got up, walked over to Mercedes, and shook her hand formally. "Very nice to meet you," he said, sounding pleased. He was supportive of us. He called us a nice couple and went to the kitchen to refill the lemonade. When Mercedes shared that she was half Cheyenne, my parents were amazed. She told them how her dad always spoke of meeting a cheerful Irish girl, and her mom boasted about capturing a Cheyenne warrior. Mom and Dad were completely fascinated. After dinner, when the three kids asked my dad to read them stories, it was clear my parents were just as charmed by my Cheyenne friend and her daughter as I was. No one mentioned that our relationship was moving too fast. Our body language seemed to assure Mom that everything would be just fine. By the time we finished washing and putting away the dishes that evening, Mom and Dad were busy trying to get their third grandchild to call them Grandma and Grandpa. They managed to do this with little effort. Maddie didn't know her own grandparents very well, so she easily accepted Tommy and Judy as her new grandparents. A week later, we flew to Philadelphia so that Mercedes could introduce me and my children to her parents. I really enjoyed meeting them. When I first met Mercedes years ago, I thought it would be great to know her family, and I was right. At first, her parents were a bit worried since Mercedes had just gone through a divorce, but they welcomed me and my children warmly, and we had a wonderful time. I suspected that Mercedes had talked to her mother, Fiona, about the 3 weeks we spent together earlier. It seemed she had done this shortly after she left me, because Fiona hugged me tightly before we were even introduced. By the time we left to go home, Tommy and Judy had gained another set of caring grandparents who were eager to spoil them. Mercedes called her ex-husband's parents to see if they wanted to meet Maddie, but they said no. That was fine with us. All 5 of us flew to Anchorage to visit Tommy and Judy's other grandparents. On the plane, the kids had a great time, quickly winning over the flight attendants in first class. They got extra snacks and a lot of attention during the flight. While the attendants played with the kids, Mom and Dad held hands and rested. Our visit with Bruce and Judy went really well, even though I had worried about it before. They knew that Sharon had asked me to find a mother for the kids and someone for me to love. They were surprised that I had found someone so quickly, but they welcomed Mercedes without hesitation. Overall, our introductions to all the family members went smoothly. Mercedes and I fit together perfectly, just like 2 pieces of a puzzle. We never had an official first date and went from just met to being completely involved very quickly. After she returned, we fell back into our relationship easily, always keeping an eye out for any issues, but we couldn't find any. Feeling encouraged, Mercedes and I got married just 3 months after she and Maddie surprised my kids and me at the pizza restaurant. Being married to Mercedes was an adventure, but a comfortable one. We agreed on many things, but we always had discussions about our different ideas. Whenever we disagreed, we talked it through and found a solution together. Sometimes we saw things from each other's viewpoints. Other times, we disagreed. The hardest moments for us were when Mercedes thought about what could have been. She often worried that she was too focused on her dance career. She wondered how our relationship might be different if she hadn't left to follow her passion. I tried to be practical about it. What happened in the past couldn't be changed. We had 3 wonderful kids who we loved dearly, and we would never regret having them. Deep down, we both knew that if Mercedes hadn't continued with her dance group, she might have regretted it later on. Any connection we had back then likely wouldn't have lasted, and we wouldn't be together today. Despite everything that had happened, we were happily married with 3 amazing children. We shared a deep love for each other and enjoyed our blended family. We fit together well and took on our roles easily. Mercedes was the mom to our kids, and I was the dad. We worked together to set rules and boundaries in our family, showing our children what a loving relationship looks like every day. One way we kept our bond strong was by having date nights often. We were newlyweds after all. My parents, or Grandma and Grandpa, loved to have the kids over for sleepovers, sometimes for entire weekends. When they were busy, 2 sisters helped us by babysitting. A long time ago, I sold a horse named Ginger and another younger mare to 2 girls named Amber and Pamela who lived close by. Now in their late teens, they were perfect for watching our 3 little ones, and we paid them well for their help. During the week, the kids attended a nearby daycare. It was important to me, and I convinced Mercedes it was a good idea. The daycare was small and had a wonderful caregiver-to-child ratio, which meant there was plenty of attention for each child. We believed it was essential for our kids to meet and play with other children. From what Tommy, Judy, and Maddie told us, they had a great time there and learned how to get along and work with others. Things were settling down nicely. In fact, everything felt nearly perfect. The bank of TV monitors announced that the 3:18 flight from Philadelphia had arrived right on time. Mercedes and I stood by the carousel waiting for our luggage to appear. We were waiting for the new teacher for Mercedes's dance school. She had mentioned it would be a woman from her dance group who was retiring. Mercedes had stepped back from performing after hurting her ankle, and it took a long time to heal. While her ankle improved, it was never strong enough for the tough demands of dancing on stage and all the practice that came with it. Now she enjoyed teaching and was really happy with it. I was lost in thought, watching passengers checking in for their flights down the long hallway. I wondered why most of them didn't use the kiosks around. It seemed strange to wait in line when they could just use the touchscreens. But that was up to them. "Hey, did someone say this is National Fly Naked Day?" a soft voice suddenly asked from behind me. I jumped slightly and turned around to see Stephanie, I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I quickly glanced at my wife, who was smirking a few steps away. I realized I had been tricked, but I would address that later when we were away from the busy airport. I turned back to Stephanie, took her hands in mine, and held her at arm's length. Time hadn't changed how attractive the blonde woman was. She caught the eye of not just men, but many women, too. "I should have guessed it was you," I said, feeling a bit foolish for not noticing sooner. A new dance instructor from Philadelphia? Of course, it made sense. "It's so nice to see you," I told Stephanie and kissed her cheek. "And who's this?" I asked, stepping back a bit. I noticed a little girl hiding behind Stephanie's leg, her skirt coming to mid-thigh. Clearly, Stephanie was still quite bold. "This is Daphne. Daphne, sweetie, can you say hello to Matt?" I bent down to be at her level and smiled. "I'm really happy to meet you, Daphne. Did your mom tell you that we were friends a long time ago?" The little girl nodded shyly, then suddenly smiled and rushed to hug me. I wasn't ready for it, and it almost knocked me off balance. I quickly put my hand behind me to steady myself on the floor. After regaining my balance, I placed my hands on her waist and hugged her back, giving her a gentle kiss on the cheek. "Let's play a little question game, like grown-ups do," I suggested. "How old are you?" She proudly held up 4 fingers, smiling widely. "And what's your name?" "Daphne Mercedes Walton," she replied cheerfully. I glanced quickly at Mercedes. "Do you know that lady?" I asked, pointing at my wife. Daphne nodded eagerly. "Aunt Mercedes," she said. "I think Aunt Mercedes could use a hug too, don't you?" I suggested. The little 4-year-old nodded again and hurried over to Mercedes. My wife bent down to pick up the little girl and they hugged tightly. When I stood up, Stephanie came into my arms. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged me more warmly than before. "I missed you, Matt," she whispered. She gave me a light kiss, then turned and joined Mercedes. The 3 of them shared a big group hug for a moment. A buzzer sounded, and the luggage carousel began moving, bringing all the passengers' bags around for collection. Stephanie pointed out her and Daphne's bags as they passed by so I could grab them and set them down. Mercedes and Stephanie each took a large suitcase and rolled them toward the exit while I pulled 2 big duffel bags. Thankfully, they had wheels behind me. Little Daphne put on a small pink backpack covered in bunnies and walked along with us to the temporary parking. I loaded everything into the back of the pickup, climbed into the driver's seat, and adjusted how my firearm was secured. The airport should be a safe place, but things can happen. I started the engine and turned on the air conditioning. Mercedes and Stephanie were already deep into what looked like a long conversation, and Daphne was listening closely. "So, where are we going?" I asked, though I pretty much knew the answer. "The guest room is all set up," Mercedes answered calmly. I had known where we were headed. I just wanted to confirm it. At home, Daphne was reunited with Maddie and met Tommy and Judy, who welcomed her without any hesitation. Tommy did ask if I had any friends with little boys, but he didn't seem too upset about it. Before long, all 4 kids ran outside to the playground we built in the backyard. Mercedes and Stephanie continued their lengthy chat, and I sat on the deck to watch the children play. "Talk to me," I told Mercedes when I finally managed to get her attention. We were in bed and I had rolled her onto her back after a long moment of affection. "About Stephanie?" she asked innocently. "Yes, about Stephanie," I replied firmly. "What's going on?" "She needed a job. I had a job for her. She's like my little sister, you know that. I love her. I wanted her to work with me in the studio and she agreed. She came down here and I want her to live with us so I can have my sister around all the time, okay?" There was nothing aggressive in her explanation. It was clear she had thought this through. In truth, none of it caught me by surprise. "But the last time you brought Stephanie here, it felt like you wanted to pull us apart," I said clearly. "Why do you want to create distance between us now?" Mercedes laughed lightly. She didn't seem worried at all. She put her hands on the back of my neck and leaned in for a sweet kiss. "That didn't really work out back then, did it?" she said gently. "You and Stevie got along really well and we ended up like the 3 Musketeers, right?" Well, not exactly. The 3 of us had shared a close bond for 2 of the 3 weeks I was with Mercedes back then, an intense relationship that filled our days. I didn't remember Dumas writing about the Musketeers in such a way. I shifted uncomfortably in bed and Mercedes wrapped her legs around mine, holding me in place. "Mercedes," I started, "we're married now, not single and, well, we can't just—" I was glad that Stephanie wasn't here to cause trouble, but there were still some tricky feelings to work through. "Shh," Mercedes whispered softly in my ear. "Stevie came here to help me at the dance studio. I really care about her, and I want her close. She will be a good friend for you too, honey. She's not going to come between us, okay?" I didn't respond right away. Her words were sinking in, but I needed a moment to think. Mercedes moved closer and playfully adjusted her nightgown. In an unexpected moment, I found myself swept away. I didn't get the chance to ask anything more. It worked out. We found our rhythm again, creating a new version of our trio, but this time without the old ways. Mercedes and I were a typical married couple, and Stephanie was our guest. Well, she helped a lot around the house for a guest. We split up all the chores. Since we didn't have a working ranch, there wasn't much to do outside. I usually handled those tasks, but the women often joined me. Mercedes and Stephanie would leave every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning in Mercedes's SUV to teach adult classes at the dance studio. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, they held classes for children after school. I took care of breakfast for our 4 kids, getting them ready for daycare if I had to go into the office or dress them for a fun day at home. If the weather was nice, the kids loved to play outside in the morning. They liked to see me on the deck where I could watch them as they played. Sometimes they would ask me to join in and play different characters based on the current mood. After an early dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would take all 4 children in their dance outfits to the studio, where they would join classes with kids their age. Tommy was not very excited about the dance classes, but the 3 girls loved learning to dance with Mercedes and Stephanie. Tommy tolerated it and even seemed to have fun sometimes. We settled into a routine but kept things fresh and exciting. Our date nights with Mercedes often included Stephanie, and we would go out for dinner, dancing, concerts, or even a movie every now and then. We also got involved, even a little bit, with some local charities and community activities. We received an invitation to a ball at the home of Kyle Mulvane, which aimed to raise money for preserving local historical sites. The joke was that the Mulvanes owned a large part of the southwest side of the city and had plans to acquire more. They were seen as important figures in the city. I had one invitation, but managed to get another so Stephanie could join Mercedes and me. The event allowed for semi-formal attire. Mercedes and Stephanie wore lovely evening gowns. Mercedes chose a dress in a soft greenish-gray color that looked stunning on her. It had an elegant design that showed off her long, graceful leg. Stephanie wore a beautiful royal blue gown that suited her perfectly. It had a deep neckline that highlighted her features nicely, and a slit on the left side to showcase her leg. As for me, I was dressed in a black tuxedo jacket and pants with a white formal shirt, black bow tie, and a cummerbund paired with shiny boots. I felt good in my cummerbund, especially since it helped me conceal my sidearm, which I carried for safety. I had considered leaving my firearm at home, but it felt strange to be without it. I had my concealed carry permit for a long time and felt strongly about protecting myself and my family. One of the first things I did after moving back to Texas was to renew my permit. When we entered the venue, we attracted a lot of attention, mainly because the two women I was with looked stunning in their gowns. We drew even more attention when we began to dance. Mercedes and Stephanie loved to dance. They had performed professionally for years and now taught dance at their own studio in the city. They wanted me to enjoy dancing too. Before I met Mercedes and Stephanie, I knew a little about shuffling my feet and holding on to a pleasant partner while dancing. But when I spent time with them, they took my dancing to a new level. I often thought of myself as someone who wasn't very good at dancing, yet my two friends encouraged me to try harder the more we danced together. They had even created a new dance step made for two women and a man. I felt more like a prop, there to highlight Mercedes and Stephanie's dancing talents. They could have used a mannequin instead, but since I could actually move, they chose me instead. The dance we performed was based on a routine they had used while traveling with a performance group. We were always moving and close to each other. After practicing for months, I was finally starting to feel confident enough to enjoy holding each lady in my arms while we danced together. It was a lot of fun. Who wouldn't enjoy being in the middle of two lovely dancers? People seemed to enjoy watching us too. We attracted more attention the longer we danced. I hadn't noticed it, but we'd moved quite close to the small stage where the band played. When the song ended, I saw the band leader smiling at us and clapping silently, signaling me to look behind. When I turned around, I saw that we had created a clear space around us on the dance floor, and there was a nice round of applause for our performance. I bowed awkwardly. Mercedes and Stephanie curtsied and smiled. We walked off the dance floor toward the bar. It was fun, but dancing with them was quite a workout. The girls were greeted by a group of men and women at one end of the bar. People welcomed Mercedes and Stephanie with big smiles and plenty of compliments. I decided to be helpful and went to the other end of the bar to get 2 glasses of white wine for them and a bottle of flavored water for myself. As the bartender finished pouring the wine, I heard a loud commotion where I left my dance partners. "Let's see them! You've been showing off all night, now let's go!" My head turned quickly. Stephanie was being confronted by a short, round man who seemed too aggressive. I caught a brief glimpse of him reaching toward her and tearing at her dress. I reacted before I had a chance to think and rushed over to help her. I must have run, but I don't remember doing it. Time has a way of slowing down during a crisis. Suddenly, I found myself behind and to the right of the man bothering Stephanie. I had just a moment to see her eyes on me. She didn't seem scared, she was just waiting for me to fix everything. I grabbed the man by his shoulder and spun him around. Then I hit him in the stomach with all my strength. As he doubled over, his chin hit my knee hard. He fell back, hitting the floor with a thud, bleeding and unconscious. I started to go after him, thinking about kicking him, but it was clear he was already out. I turned around to find Stephanie and pulled her into my arms. She held on tight around my waist. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, looking into her eyes. She nodded and rested her cheek against my chest, holding on even tighter. After a moment, I pulled back slightly, took off my jacket and draped it over her to cover her up. There was a lot of chaos around us. Some people were asking what had happened, while others were trying to explain. Not everyone had seen everything from the start, so the stories began to stray from the truth. I scanned the room for Mercedes. She was close by, looking worried. Mercedes held up her phone. Even in fancy places, everyone has their phones these days. "I got it all on video!" she shouted with excitement. "I filmed everything. That guy tried to hurt Stephanie right here, and I caught it all." Her voice cut through the noise and silenced the crowd for a moment. I nodded in agreement, turned Stephanie around, and caught Mercedes's eye. We began to move toward the stairs we had come up. Just a few steps from the first one, a very tall man in a tuxedo blocked our way. "Mr. Mulvane wants to see the lady's phone," he said calmly. He pointed to a man standing by a column. That was Mr. Mulvane, and he didn't look happy. His face showed he was anxious and angry. "No," I replied quickly, but I didn't feel aggressive. "I'm not doing that." I tried to get past the big guy on my right, but he pushed his hand against my chest to stop me. He looked at Mercedes and made a gesture asking for something while keeping me in place. When I moved, his other hand grabbed my shoulder tightly. "Look down!" I said in a low, angry voice. I was not happy at all. He ignored me, thinking he was in charge. I pressed the gun I had taken from its holster against his stomach. "Look down!" I warned him. Finally, he looked down and realized things had changed. He wasn't in control anymore. My finger was resting on the trigger, ready to pull. Glocks have a safety built into the trigger, and I had already disengaged it. If I squeezed even a little more, it would fire. "It's aimed upward," I said in a calm tone. "If I start shooting, I could hit you right in the heart. Do you understand?" He nodded and slowly raised his hands to show they were empty. "Do you have a weapon?" I asked. He nodded. "It's small at my back," he explained. "Take it out," I said. "Slowly. Just your left hand. Use your thumb and finger only." He followed my instructions carefully. I reached over with my left hand and took the gun from his relaxed grip. I stepped back a few feet, keeping my weapon aimed at him the whole time. I noticed some people behind me gasp. It was clear to them now that I had a gun pointed at the big guy. "Get on your belly," I ordered. He did so right away. "Stephanie, Mercedes." I signaled for the two women to move to my left and lowered my arm so my gun was pointed down. I made sure my finger was safely alongside the gun's frame. In no time, the three of us moved up the steps, across the lobby, and out the door. I left the bodyguard's gun on a table as we walked by. An unsuspecting valet brought our SUV to the front, and we drove away quietly. After that, things went smoothly. No one tried to stop us. A few police cars rushed past us a couple of miles down the road, but they didn't notice us at all. Our trip to McReady Airfield continued without any problems. I had owned the airfield for almost a year, but I kept its original name. Many of our weekend visitors, who were my best customers, recognized this place by its old name. They used it because they were familiar with it. Shortly after we arrived, our SUV was parked next to the hangar, and we boarded the twin-engine Cessna that had brought us to the city. I started the takeoff while Mercedes and Stephanie were still fastening their seatbelts. 42 minutes after taking off, we landed, secured the plane, and a little later we were safely back in our ranch house. Thanks to our security system, we knew we were safe there. However, things were not quite settled. By the next afternoon, detectives in the big city had identified everyone involved. They worked with the county sheriff from our area to come and interview us. In fact, there were enough of them to form a 6-vehicle group that drove through our gates to the main house. The sheriff himself came to our door showing respect. He knew my dad had served as sheriff during some tough times in the county, and that many older residents remembered him well. When the current sheriff saw Dad, he was very polite and courteous. Inside, Stephanie, Mercedes, and I gave the city officers the written statements we had prepared and answered their questions, as long as they seemed genuinely interested in understanding what had happened. We also shared a copy of the video that Mercedes had recorded on her phone. But as soon as the youngest detective asked a tricky question, one of our lawyers stopped the questioning with a firm statement, making it clear that we would not answer any further questions. The detective looked frustrated at this, and his colleagues noticed. One of the officers was from the district attorney's office, and she seemed to know all the lawyers I had brought in that morning. When a detective looked at her for guidance, she just shrugged. She couldn't intervene. She knew my lawyers were excellent, especially considering how much I was paying them. I hoped they would be worth the cost. Another group of my lawyers was already at the DA's office, pushing for immediate action against the person who had attacked Stephanie, arguing that he should be charged with serious offenses. 3 weeks and 4 days later, it was all resolved. The person responsible turned out to be Mr. Mulvane's youngest son. Mulvane attempted to defend his son's actions and even tried to blame Stephanie. Our lawyers quickly took action against Mulvane's and the city's attorneys, ready to challenge them in court for blaming the victim. Our main lawyer seemed eager to confront them publicly. Seeing the pressure, the Mulvane team started to retreat. It was like a snowball rolling downhill. Under this pressure, the district attorney charged Doofus with 3 serious crimes and various lesser charges. There were even more videos of the incident, in addition to the one Mercedes filmed, and none of them favored the Mulvanes. Eventually, Doofus pleaded guilty to 1 charge and received a 6-month jail sentence. But this kept him out of a Texas prison, although he did get a felony on his record. Initially, the district attorney wanted to show leniency toward the Mulvanes and charge him with a minor offense. But our lawyers made sure the local news was fully aware of the situation. The DA had narrowly won his last election and wanted to avoid any issues with a wealthy opponent like me in the future. The DA's office tried to make a case out of the fact that I had used a weapon, but we argued that the large bodyguard's actions were inappropriate and crossed a line. A video showed the big man pushing my chest, which stopped any further claims against me. If he had taken Mercedes's phone, that would have led to even more legal trouble, including theft and tampering with evidence. Fortunately, the DA decided not to pursue any charges against me. My lawyers were let down. They had hoped for more work if the DA had decided to move forward. Stephanie's lawsuit against the Mulvanes for creating an unwelcoming environment was quickly settled to avoid even more negative attention. Out of nowhere, Stephanie became a millionaire, and Mulvane even covered her legal fees. Afterward, our lawyers returned to Dallas. I stopped spending so much on their services, and calm returned to our ranch. I foolishly thought things would stay like that. A few weeks later, my parents came by to take all 4 kids. Stephanie's little girl, Daphne, was welcomed as one of my parents' grandchildren. They were heading out for a long weekend camping trip in my parents' big RV. I didn't think staying in a comfortable RV counted as camping, but everyone has their own idea of fun. Based on a video call we had earlier that evening, the kids were all enjoying themselves. Mom and Dad couldn't stop smiling. Having 4 grandkids all to themselves without the parents around was Mom and Dad's perfect dream. I was in bed, and since Mercedes wasn't with me, I was looking through the cable provider's movie channel lists for films to save and watch later. I was enjoying some quiet time without worrying about any child-related emergencies that might come up unexpectedly. The hallway door opened and Mercedes walked in. She surprised me. I thought she was in the bathroom and would come into the bedroom that way. I was even more surprised when Stephanie stepped into the room right after my wife. Both women were wearing sheer black robes that didn't hide much. I quickly pulled the covers up to hide my middle because I suddenly felt a little flustered. "Matt, dear, we have a problem," Mercedes said, sounding serious. I could almost hear a cartoon character saying, "uh-oh," in my mind. Mercedes sat on the bed to my right and took control of the remote. Stephanie sat on my left but kept some distance between us, looking beautiful and confident. Mercedes started the DVD player, scrolled through some options, and selected a clip named Stephanie. It seemed like she had it ready to go. "Watch this," Mercedes insisted. It was the video from the Mulvane incident, which I was familiar with. I watched as a guy acted foolishly around Stephanie and then reached for her gown, tearing it down. Stephanie's reaction was one of surprise rather than fear, even though others nearby surely reacted loudly. Suddenly, I appeared from the side, grabbed the guy, and pushed him away quickly. I felt good about how I handled it, using enough strength to protect Stephanie but holding back my anger. All my lawyers agreed it was the right move. It kept things clear, so I wouldn't face any trouble from the authorities. The clip ended with me putting my jacket around Stephanie to cover her. "Did you see it?" Mercedes asked, full of emotion. I wasn't sure what she meant other than the obvious. "I've seen it before, yes," I replied, unsure of her point. Mercedes started the video again. "Look closely, Matt. Watch Stephanie's face. Watch her eyes." I followed her advice as she played the clip slowly. I didn't notice much I hadn't seen before. I shrugged, wanting to contribute to the conversation, but I felt like I was losing the chance to speak up. I wasn't sure what my wife wanted me to see. Mercedes climbed up onto the bed and I made space for her, shifting under the blanket closer to Stephanie, who stayed on top of it and safe. My wife pointed the remote at the player and replayed the video in slow motion. "Do you see?" Mercedes almost whispered. "Our Steffi isn't afraid of that guy she's looking at you coming to help her. See?" That seemed to be true. Stevie wasn't focused on the strange man. She seemed to be looking at me as I came into view. She didn't even flinch while I stepped in. When I turned back to her, she just looked up at me, wrapped her arms around me, and rested her face against my chest. Mercedes rewound the tape to where Stephanie was gazing up at me and paused it. She leaned over and kissed me gently. "Honey," she said softly. "Steffi wasn't scared. She knew her hero was coming to save her. And you did." She paused for a moment. "See how she looks at you. You can tell my sister has feelings for you, and you know it." I took a deep breath. I couldn't deny what Mercedes said. "And here's what Mrs. Stanley caught on her phone," Mercedes added, anticipating any defense I might have. She played another short clip that showed me quickly taking off my jacket and putting it around Stephanie to comfort her. When it ended, Mercedes backed it up to my face, looking down at Stephanie. "And darling," Mercedes murmured, "you care for her too?" I didn't know what to say. What she said was true, although I had been trying to convince myself otherwise for a while. I couldn't argue with what Mercedes was telling me. The video spoke for itself. "Honey," I started in a shaky voice. "I would never—" I stopped, looking at Stephanie. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I needed to reassure my wife. "Sweetheart," I tried again, "I could never betray you. I wouldn't do that to you." While I was sorting through my thoughts, Mercedes had turned off the DVD player and dimmed the lights to a warm glow. Then she stood up and let her robe slide down to the floor. I noticed movement on my left. Stephanie was also letting her robe fall and was smiling at me as she did. Both women slipped under the blanket and cuddled close. Stephanie rested her head on my shoulder while Mercedes snuggled next to me and propped herself up on her elbow. "Sweetheart," she whispered gently, "I know you would never betray me." "You don't have to worry, Matt," Mercedes said gently. "But—" I started, hesitating. "Shh, I know," she replied, giving me a comforting pat on the shoulder. Both women gave me a light, friendly kiss on the cheek. "Look, Matt," Mercedes continued calmly. "There's no betrayal here, no secrets, no sneaking around. Everything's right here, open for all of us." Stephanie leaned over, resting on her elbow, and gave me a warm, reassuring kiss. "I love you, Matt," she said quietly. "I have for a long time, and I always will." "You see?" Mercedes added softly. "She cares about you, and I care about her, and you care about both of us, right?" "I do," I said, taking a deep breath. "But since you were part of Stephanie's journey, we just need to make things right. You see that, don't you?" Mercedes continued. How did I protested, surprised. I hadn't realized my part in all of this." "Because he wasn't you," Stephanie said softly. "And I think I was looking for you all along without realizing it. I didn't mean for things to happen as they did, but here we are now, and I know we'll be happier together." I listened, letting her words sink in. It was clear that both Mercedes and Stephanie meant what they said. "But do you know how complicated this is going to be?" I sighed. They didn't seem too worried, and I had to admit I felt a bit of relief. "Yep," Mercedes replied cheerfully from one side. "We'll figure it out," Stephanie added from the other. "It'll be great." And for the most part, it was. We each had our own strong personalities, which sometimes led to disagreements, but we promised each other to always talk things through and never let issues build up. We agreed to resolve things, no matter how long it took, before calling it a night. We shared our lives openly and respectfully, and we grew closer as we continued on our journey together. Each day brought a new understanding, and while there were challenges, we faced them as a team, finding joy and strength in our connection. When we wanted to spend some quality time together, we made sure to find ways to do it often. We decided that the three of us needed more time with each other than a typical couple. To manage this, we frequently asked my parents or local teenagers to watch over the 4 kids. My parents loved all the kids and enjoyed seeing them as much as they could. Whenever my parents needed a break or had other plans, we would call on Amber and Pamela to help with babysitting. They were happy to help and were well compensated for their time. After Pam went to college and Amber married a local guy, They recommended other babysitters who could watch the kids overnight or on weekends. There were always plenty of sitters available in the area, and we used them often. Before the oldest kids started school, I adopted Maddie and Daphne. Maddie was named after me. Mercedes' husband didn't mind since he didn't want kids, and he easily agreed to give up his rights as a father. Daphne's ex also agreed to do the same since he met someone else and wanted to focus on their family. He couldn't afford to visit Daphne regularly, and their relationship faded away. I was surprised when Stevie and Mercedes decided they wanted more children. I thought 4 was enough, but they convinced me otherwise. Stevie had another girl, and Mercedes had a boy a couple of years after we all became a close-knit trio. Then Stevie had a boy, and Mercedes welcomed another girl. I loved all the kids. My life was full of love from my partners and the children around us. I looked down the hill and saw my 19-year-old son, Tommy, and a couple of the older girls walking up to the house, probably for dinner, even though it was a bit early. Mercedes handed me a glass of iced tea, and we settled into our porch chairs to enjoy the cool evening air. Tommy had grown into a stronger version of me, but you could still see his mother in his nose and his serious expressions. 17-year-old Maddie was a cheerful look-alike of her mother, Mercedes, while 18-year-old Daphne had the grace and charm of Stevie. Tommy and Daphne were already attending Texas 8A&DM, and Maddie was preparing to start there in the fall. My daughter Judy wanted to become a pediatrician and was studying pre-med at TCU, but was home with us for a few weeks between terms. Judy was in the backyard supervising the younger children as they played. I could hear their happy squeals and shouts. When I was a teenager, younger than our older kids are now, my mom and dad let me stay alone in the house that our kids just left. Later, I convinced Mercedes and Stevie that letting our older kids do the same would help them learn responsibility and prepare for adulthood. I thought it was a good idea. The 4 of them had made the place feel like home. There were plenty of bedrooms, and everyone seemed content. The kids enjoyed their freedom, which also gave us adults some room to care for the younger ones. I appreciated not having to listen to the latest music that I found hard to understand. I watched Tommy, Daphne, and Maddie walk steadily up the path toward us. The area where I used to train was now just an open field. Tommy and the 2 girls were linked together as they stopped. Tommy and Maddie looked at each other closely. Maddie wrapped her arms around Tommy's neck and gave him a kiss. After that, Daphne pulled Tommy closer and kissed him too. "Wow," I said in surprise. It was clear what they were trying to tell us. They started moving again. Tommy had one arm around Maddie and the other around Daphne, while the girls held on to him just as tightly. Mercedes laughed next to me. "I told you he'd figure it out eventually," she said while looking at Stevie. Stevie giggled in response. "Took him long enough, huh?" I realized I had missed some signs around me. "Dad," Tommy said when they reached the porch. He didn't sound rude. He seemed sincere. The girls kissed me on the cheek and waited nearby with gentle smiles. I looked at the 3 of them. I tried to look serious, but I couldn't manage it. "You all know how tricky things can get, right?" I asked as I looked at each of them. I expected to see some shame, but none was there. "Yes," they replied together, smiling again. The girls walked up the steps to link arms with their mothers. "But we'll always have you and Mom to help us when things get tough, Daddy," Maddie said softly but confidently. I let out a deep sigh. There was no point in resisting what was already happening. "All right, go inside and wash up for dinner," I said, standing up and heading to the front door. I gave Tom and the young women a warm hug as they walked into the living room. I watched them go inside and took a deep breath. I never really wanted them to grow up, but here we are. My 2 loving wives came to me, wrapped me in their arms, and showered me with kisses. After a while, I opened the screen door and invited them in. I closed it behind me and headed around the house to find our little ones playing in the backyard. I wanted to hug them and have fun before they got older. I have met and loved 4 women in my life. 1 hurt me, 2 went away but then returned, and 1 left me alone. From all of them, I've learned that life keeps moving forward and it's a wild journey. You better hold on tight because the surprises can really shake you up if you're not ready. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.